right, we are live. Welcome back to Reasoned Answers.
It's as good as waging war against Allah and His Messenger.
Today we will be continuing our look at the life of Muhammad. And last time we talked about Khadija, the first wife of Muhammad. And now we're going to talk about some of her relatives and friends, people who Muhammad had close contact in. We often hear about Waraqa, supposed Christian, who was very close to Muhammad. We're going to be asking the question, well, one, who are these people? Were they actually Christians? We're going to be looking at some lesser known figures, seeing just how many monotheists there were in the region who Muhammad had contact with, because we kind of get both sides from different Muslims. Some will tell us that no, Arabia was completely pagan. There was not a monotheist anywhere to be found. It's a complete and total miracle that Muhammad had any of this information. While others will tell us that the opposite, right? That there was lots of monotheists around, and they all accepted Muhammad as a true prophet, and they would know. So this is the miracle of Islam. Different Muslims, different ideas about what the supposed miracle is. We're going to just be looking for the truth today. Not going to be approaching it with a predetermined narrative, a standard narrative, if you like, but we're going to be digging into the sources, not treating them as completely false, but not treating them as infallible either, and trying to determine the historical truth of the matter. Welcome back to the stream. Mary, what would you like to say as introduction?
Not really much. That covers it pretty well. We'll be talking not only about three of her cousins, two of whom you've probably never even heard of before, but we are also going to be talking about a whole bunch of the slaves of Muhammad and Khadija that they had while they were still in Mecca. So we can bring that up. Those are going to be our major
Excellent.
focus. There are other folks who are recorded as being Hanifa or who are recorded as being, uh, some kind of something in the sources, but we're talking about the ones that are most closely connected to Muhammad and Khadija in very direct ways right now.
Excellent. I like that phrase, some kind of something, to describe what's going on here. Because, I
It's the
mean,
most accurate, I
the
think.
Muslims don't know. Yeah, exactly. A perfect phrase to describe what's going on here. All right, I'll pull up your presentation then.
All right, so we this is a picture of two Assyrian Christians. So we are going to ask the question, was Khadija really some kind of Christian or Christian heretic or anything else? And was her family Christian as well? There are, as Thaddeus said, there are warring tendencies in Islamic sources. The first one is to make Muhammad seem as ignorant as he possibly can be. And so they'll insist that Muhammad ever only took Khadija's camels on one trip, and that as an adult, he only ever went on one trading trip to make him seem as isolated as possible. So he couldn't possibly get influences from anywhere except for this angel. And so all these wonderful things that he knew, they have to be truly genuine because of that. They also massively downplay the fact that Muhammad was fluent in Ethiopic from Baraka, his slave as well, because of course there were lots of Abyssinian uh, slaves who were of Christian background, even if they themselves were not all that Christian because they'd been enslaved for too long and had forgotten. They had Christian backgrounds in their family. So that the other tendency is to make Muhammad's monotheistic connections to seem as legitimate as possible and as large as possible. So these folks will present Waraqa as a legitimate Christian and have random other Christians and Jews recognize Muhammad from their scripture in various places. The Shia even claim that Muhammad was always a monotheist, and so was Khadija. This is not an official Sunni view, but Sunnis have been leaning into this position as well. Sometimes this pushes all the way to the level that Khadija is called a Christian herself, because that was during the time after which Isa had come. Then the people who most recently had revelation were the Christians, and so she's one of those types of monotheists of some sort. That's how far it will be pushed, and I am pretty baffled as to why this happens. But sometimes Christians will just like repeat that, oh, Khadija, she was a Christian, or she was an Nestorian Christian, or something like that, and who wanted to set him up as a prophet. It's like, why are you saying that? I have no idea why you're saying that. It's part of a fabrication to try to support Muhammad as being legitimately recognized by knowledgeable people. So neither one of these positions is credible whatsoever. Khadija named two of her sons Abd Manaf and Abd al-Uzza, even though the sources are not clear necessarily which man was the father of Abd Manaf or Abd al-Uzza. These pagan god names were given to her sons. These are theophoric pagan names. She's also from a line that has lots of pagan names in it, because guess what? She's pagan. Muhammad said that Khadija's infant children who died in the Jahiliyyah are in hellfire. So the ones that she had with her previous husbands, they're in hell. Why are they in hell, folks? Because the parents of these children, both the parents of these children, were polytheists. So in the era of polytheism, their kids all went to hell. Then she asked whether the son that she'd had with Muhammad, in context, this has to be a son who was born before the time of his prophethood, was also in hellfire. The only reason that she would ask that question is if Muhammad was also a pagan at that time. So Khadija was a pagan with her pagan husbands. Their children died, went to hellfire. Khadija was a pagan with her pagan husband Muhammad, and she asked whether or not the son that Muhammad thought was his was in hellfire too. And he's like, oh no, that one's in paradise anyway, and just granted this child an exception. But she's asking the question why? Because Muhammad was also a pagan. Muhammad made sacrifices to Alat, the goddess Alat, and Taif. There is an article called "A Bag of Meat" by Kistler, and it's a very, very good article that talks about various versions of a certain hadith about Muhammad having gone to Taif and done a sacrifice to pagan god there, and coming back and getting told by someone who rejected sacrificing pagan gods and saying, hey, you shouldn't, I won't share this food with you because you sacrificed it to a pagan god. Now, why would someone say that if Muhammad was a pure monotheist? Yeah, he wasn't. One of those sons, possibly both of them, with the pagan names, was probably from Muhammad as well. Muhammad was found wandering by Allah in 93:7. Surah 93:7. What does that mean? Found wandering is a term used for people who are not rightly guided. So he was a polytheist who worshipped many gods other than Allah, who was found wandering by Allah. Then he was later instructed, some time later, instructed to stay away from arush, which means filth, specifically filthy idols, and 74:5. So he's been following Allah for a while when Allah has to instruct him that he needs to stay away from these idols. What does that mean? Muhammad continued to associate with the idols for some time after having declared himself to be a prophet and supposedly was receiving messages from Allah. And so now he has to be told to stay away from them. both Muhammad and Khadija were pagans who worshipped lots of other gods besides Allah. Now,
So real quick, before you go any further, I did remember that there was 2 comments from before we got started that I wanted to read from Mustafa. Islam is getting lots of reverts cutting priests, a luxurious opera.
that's
So
not even me.
apparently, lots of people are converting to Islam and then cutting priests, which is not exactly a great advertisement for Islam. You convert to Islam and then suddenly you have lots of violent tendencies and you want to cuss all the priests. Okay. I'm not sure who luxurious opera is, but good to know. Good to know. However, we have a counterpoint here from Cash who says, I was a mom before I saw this video. Now I am the Pope. Alhamdulillah. So there you go. Maybe lots of people are leaving Islam and becoming the Pope, or maybe lots of people are converting to Islam and then cutting priests. Mystery that I guess we won't be able to solve. Thank you guys for being here today. And I'm not what I'm not said. Hi, everyone. Time to learn about the Gnostic origins of Islam. Is that where we're going to end up today, Mary? On these monotheistic relatives of Khadija and friends of Muhammad?
Well, we will touch a little bit on some of the Gnostic elements, but that isn't like the main focus. We're not going to talk too much about their specific beliefs, just whether or not they appear to be Christian, what kind of Christian could they be, that kind of stuff.
Excellent. And then I
So,
had one question on topic here from Houston. Says, so Shia think there are other kinds of monotheists besides Christians or Jews?
so do the Sunnis. Like their big thing about, oh, they were Hanifs, they were of the religion of Abraham. So they magically downloaded from God apparently a religion of Abraham. Because my question is, according to Islam, right? Every prophet brings a book, including, well, every messenger brings a book, although the early sources do not distinguish between a messenger and a prophet. But every messenger brings a book. And Mohammed and Abraham was supposed to be a great messenger and was supposed to have his own book. Where is Abraham's book, and how could they be on the path of Abraham if they didn't have this book? That's the question. So this odd flavor of Ahmadiyism is apparently polytheistic now. So he's gone pure pagan. So Muhammad decries paganism. The Quran, except for whenever the satanic verses were in there, decried paganism. But he wants to restore the good old pagan, the satanic verses, and that is his true Quran. Very interesting.
Mhm. But it is shirk, right, for Muhammad to be on the wrong path and associate partners with Allah and whatnot,
Well,
which some would say is unforgivable. I mean, he just said it's, so I'm not really sure what it's is in reference to. But if it was in reference to 93:7, where Muhammad's found wandering astray, following after idols and whatnot, I guess that would be shirk.
well, he said shirk's fine. Shirk is fine. It apparently there is a true Quran out there that says that polytheism was okay all along. So he
Oh
apparently has
yeah,
the
yeah. I missed his
satanic
other
verses.
comment there.
Yep,
Yeah.
the satanic verses restored version. So
There's nothing
all right.
wrong in paganism. It's only shirk, I guess, that is
I mean, he
wrong.
is right about one thing. The surviving Quran, the only one that exists,
Uh-huh.
is the Sunni Quran. So the one that the Shia had was in fact destroyed, and there are many Christian references to recording the consternation of the followers of Ali that their Qurans were being taken away and destroyed and everything, and that that the authorities were altering it. But guess what? Nobody knows what these actually said. Nobody has them. because they were successfully destroyed by the state, which is quite possible when there is a false religion and there is no God actually protecting the text. But you think that somehow for 1,000+ years, God was cool with everyone being led astray and just going to hellfire, and then just goes, oh, by the way, here, let me fix this now, whenever your own cult leader came along, because that makes so much sense. All right. Let's move on and leave the cult member behind for a while.
Absolutely.
So, big question is, was Islam influenced directly by heretical Christianity? So, is there a link between a specific group or groups of heretical Christianity that influenced Muhammad and his views and contributed to it? And so the main argument from historical sources that come toward it are the Panarian of Epiphanius. Because in that he accuses Arabia of harboring a lot of heresy. One important point, though, is that the Hijaz is not Arabia for him. He's mostly talking about the northernmost parts up in modern Syria. He's not even talking about the more southerly parts, nothing south of Petra, essentially. It is even in his view, first of all. So Epiphanius' sources are not great for his material either. He basically had Isnad-style sources. So he heard something from a traveler and he'd just write it down. Or he'd interpret something being described and hit it with a Christian stick and try to Christianize something that's being described that isn't even Christian at all, like trying to make it into something that these heretics are doing when it may not be something that anyone who has any affiliation with Christianity whatsoever is doing. It's their own thing for different reasons and everything else. And the biggest oopsie in his sources is the so-called karidian heresy, which he literally makes up. Because whenever you see what is described in it, what's being described is that there are women who are baking bread and laying a table for a goddess, the Queen of Heaven. And whenever you find out who these particular people were who are being accused of this and where they're from, you realize immediately that this is, and it's also supposed to be a yearly festival as well, which does not match anything in Christianity whatsoever. But you have a yearly festival of baking bread for an important goddess figure who's like a female ruling figure. And guess what you find? You find that it traces back to the festival of Tammuz, where there's an Ishtar figure celebrating their marriage, and the folks who are attributed with celebrating this are actually from like a certain part of Anatolia and north into the Caucasus Mountains, where there were people who took their own particular, or no, not Anatolia, over in Thrace, and in the Caucasus Mountains, and they took their goddess figures and were heavily influenced by this Ishtar story, and so they conflated their goddess with Ishtar in this particular context because they kind of had a human king who married a goddess in their own stories, and so they squeezed it all together and conflated them all in syncretism. They had this tradition. So I mean, he's kind of right. It's about syncretism. Is syncretism, but it has nothing to do with Christianity. They were not worshiping Mary. He just like made this up because he sees heretics behind every corner, even when it's just pagans still doing pagan things that pagans have done for a long time. It's an authentically pagan practice. It has nothing to do with Mary, Christianity, anything else. So no, there were no heretical Christians or folks associated with Christianity in any way who worshipped Mary, which is supposed to be the one thing that's supposed to be somewhat similar to the Islamic view of Mary, because Allah thinks that the Trinity is a triad of three gods:
Mhm.
the Father, Mary, and Jesus, who came into existence only at conception, like in a son. And Muslims go to the supposed karidian sect to say, oh, well, there were some weird people out there worshiping Mary at some point in Syria, but no, there weren't. That there is no connection there. So that's one important point, is that the one connection that people try to make, oh, worshiping Mary, no, it didn't exist. Muhammad was just completely confused because he didn't know what the Trinity was, and what Muhammad did is that he compared the religious system that he was used to, in which there's Allah and the three daughters of Allah. So if there is a father and son, then who's the third? Well, it's got to be the mother. You can't leave the goddess out of it, right? So that's what he was doing, and it shows that he doesn't actually know what Christians have ever believed, that he made that argument, that he has no clue. Now, there is one group that has some similarities with Islam, and they did exist at that time, which the Coloridians didn't. If they had ever existed, which they didn't as a group, but even the pagans by that time didn't exist. But the Messalians, they did exist and were still kicking around in the area. They were unassociated monastic figures who would go out independently into the desert without any sort of organization, supervision, affiliation, totally independent. And they would try to have visions of God the Father. And they believed that the Father has a body, and it specifically seemed to stem from a Christianization of Merkabah mysticism. So what Merkabah mysticism is that you have some mystical Jews who were very influenced by Gnosticism also, and they would sit around trying to get visions of God on his throne. And they didn't think that they were just like visions being given to them, but were actually seeing a reality. So the non-heretical position is that God sometimes chooses to present visions to his prophets. These visions are not glimpses into the actual reality of God, but are rather things that they see that represent activities, truths, prophecies, that sort of stuff. So when Ezekiel saw God on a throne, it's not because God has a body on a throne. It's because he's being given a vision that is a representation of an idea. That's just a visual representation of an idea. But the folks that had Merkabah mysticism thought that they were really like peeping in on God in his throne room, and also gaining powers from being able to navigate the mystical paths and go and find God and see him there on his throne. And the Messalians similarly seemed to believe that they could like get enough heat stroke living out all by themselves in the desert and start seeing things, and among the things they'll start seeing is God. But the difficulty, so this does explain why there's a particular fondness for monks, specifically isolated monks unaffiliated with any authority, hanging out in desert places and being weird, like they're the good guys in Islam. But you can't distinguish between things that are Messalian from things that are stuff that the Merkabah mystics did. Because everything in the Quran and in the Ahadith that's Messalian is also with something that a Merkabah mystic would do. And there are elements that are specific to Merkabah mysticism that are not found probably, we don't know that much about the Messalians, but it's probably not found in Messalian practices. So,
All right, let me take a couple comments here. Um, so I thought, right, I thought that I'd never find anything crazier than standard Islamic beliefs, but I stand corrected here because Qadiani informs us that the British wrote the Sunni Quran to control the Sunni world. I asked him how the British managed to do that hundreds of years before they existed, and he told me that the Sunni Quran was only written 200 years ago. He still hasn't told me what all the manuscripts that are virtually identical with minor variants from the standard versions, plural, of the Quran available today are, but hey, apparently the British had their time traveling uterus and went back and wrote these manuscripts 200 years ago. They got in their uterus, went back and left them 1,000 years in the past for us to find. And that is how they invented Sunni Islam. Okay, whatever you say. Eli wants to know if Harb is your real last name.
no,
What does Harb mean?
means war.
Hmm.
But it's also a Germanic last name.
So you take your pick there, whether Mary is declaring war or not. And then we have Mulhid, who I think is a Muslim. Ya Allah, please make these infidels into the best of creatures, i.e. Muslims. And then a whole bunch of crying emojis. Great argument there. Great argument. I'm just basically on the verge of converting. If you could just give me one good reason to convert, I'd love to hear it.
Do the best of creatures put their penises in small children? I just want you to tell me whether or not the best of creatures put their penises in small children. If that is
Good
something
question.
within the description of the best people in the world. All right. So, continuing on, there are peculiarities to the Islamic Isa that do not match any historical, heretical, pseudo-Christian group. None. And there are also zero similarities with Nestorianism. I really want people to stop calling them Nestorians. While I do not think that the Church of Assyria has got a really great grasp on the ontology of God and how personhood functions in the Trinity, they also have absolutely nothing in common with this, and I don't think they're heretics either. Sorry, guys. Not by what they're actually saying. They're just a little bit confused. So, John of Damascus, he identifies Muhammad's imaginary monk as Arian as a shorthand for a monk that must believe that Isa is a creature rather than being divine. Not because he thinks that Muhammad was actually trained by a specific heretical sect of any sort. He doesn't give us the specific monk story any credence. He says who supposedly was met this monk. He doesn't believe that Muhammad ever met any monk, but he says he supposedly met an Arian monk because that would reflect one piece of the Isa in Islam, but only a small piece, because in Arianism, Isa or Jesus is still, while the first creature, he is a qualitatively different creation than all other creation, and a qualitatively higher creation than all other creation to like an infinite extent, which is not what is taught in Islam. It's just a shorthand. There was no man Bahira who had Muhammad's mole in his scripture.
Oh.
Did not happen. Nobody had a book that said, there will come a prophet who has a big red purple mole on his back that's all hairy and weird. So there was also...
It's not open to debate, so there's no point in opening that up.
Nice.
You paused for a second there, so I threw that in.
Nice. There's also no heretical sect that thought that Jesus came into existence when he was conceived and yet is somehow divine. So Muhammad is addressing what he believes to be people's belief, that all of Jesus came into existence except for the pre-existent soul, but everybody has a pre-existent soul, that came into existence at conception, and then it's somehow divine in some way, and argues against that. Nobody believed that. No group, not any heretical group. There's no trace of that kind of belief. As I say here, it took 1,800 years for the Mormons to be as stupid as Muhammad to come up with an idea that moronic. Now, the Gnostic influences are very strong, but they were also very strong in rabbinical mysticism. And they continue to be strong in rabbinical mysticism until the present day. This is probably not derived from any particular Gnostic sect, but as part of the cultural background noise of that era. The Preexistent Souls that just get incorporated is one example. And in Islam, Allah talks to everyone's soul while they are still inside of Adam. He creates Adam along with all the pre-existent souls that will ever live. And when a child is conceived, at some point, Allah sends down a soul to inhabit the child. The soul already exists. And this is a Gnostic idea. And Una points out that if Muhammad lived during the Salem witch trials, the mole would be enough evidence that he was a witch. And in fact, that kind of belief that if you had a weird, like, body thing, that you were touched by a demon or touched by jinn, that was the standard belief of the era. What anyone in his society would have said if they saw that thing is that the jinn got you. You've been touched by jinn, you've been influenced by jinn, etc., etc. And it is a very good question as to whether or not Joseph Smith had a mole. It would be hilarious if he did. I will have to check that out. So,
indeed. It certainly wasn't claimed to be a sign of a prophet, although he may have had one. I mean, lots of people have moles, so possible. We'll have to figure that out.
So the specific Islamic shape of what they believe Christianity to be and what they believe that Jesus really taught himself. So they have this belief that there are these groups of people who are confused about Christianity, but then the main group of Christians all agree with them. This is something really important that you have to realize. They thought that the Romans had the beliefs that they had about Asa. They believed that. They believed that the Ethiopians had the beliefs they had about Asa, that he was just a man but a great prophet, right? This is what Muhammad taught. And he also taught that some Christians have wrong beliefs. And the wrong beliefs that some Christians have are that there are three, Allah, Mary, and Isa. And Isa came about, but Isa could not be a god because Allah does not have a girlfriend, or Allah refused to take a son. And so because Muhammad's belief in what the standard Christians believe is not found anywhere in any heretical sect in any place in any time. And also his belief about what the supposedly confused Christians believe is not found among any group at any time. This shows that both come from ignorance. He did not purposefully teach that the Romans believe something that they don't believe. He accidentally taught that. Why? Because he learned about it through the telephone game. He learned about it through things that he heard from people who were raised Christian but were small children when they were taken captive, from people who were the second generation of enslaved Christians who weren't literate anymore in their historical culture and did not have good instruction. So he got this weird, muddled, confused folk form of Christianity, Christian knowledge, and that's all he had. So Islam's Asa is stupid, not because it reflects some organized, thought out cult view, but rather for the same reason that Dhul Qarnayn is a prophet and Al-Khidr is like completely insane in Islam, because it's a muddled story. It's confused. It's mixed up. It's not, there's no branch, there's nobody out there that this is taken from in a coherent sort of fashion. So,
You didn't read your last line there, which is a shame because I had the Dul
yeah, I did.
Carnain animation ready to go.
Yeah, I did. Yes, I did.
Oh, I didn't hear the word Dul Carnain. My bad.
Yeah, I did. There you go. There it is. So, the Assad family. Khadija was the granddaughter of Assad. So now we're going to talk about her family, meaning the descendants of her paternal grandfather, her father's father. Okay. And it seems most likely that that this particular this tribe, was the one who supplied the katib, the tribal scribe, who had the position of recording marriages, oaths, and contracts. There's still a position of katib in Bedouin society today. It might slowly be dying away because there just aren't that many Bedouins anymore. But people are settling down and wanting a better lifestyle. But it continued into the Islamic era as a very important role for places that didn't, like tribes that didn't have their own mullahs. They would have a katib, and it was an important role that was political and also fundamentally religious. Um, Now, these written documents are testified to in the early Islamic sources. They're associated with Qusay's dar, his court, his house. It was, eventually the whole thing was like closed in, and it became like entirely an enclosed building. So um, these things would have been written there. There are sources about things being written on leaves and inscribed on bones, and people read that as if they're makeshift, but actually and sticks, writing on bones, leaves, and sticks, and scratching into them, and then rubbing soot into them to make the marks black. That was actually the normal way of writing stuff there, where they didn't have either papyrus or well preserved or well prepared parchment. So it doesn't indicate makeshiftedness. It indicates that this happened in the Hijaz, because this was something that was done in Yemen and in the Hijaz, and was not done farther north, where people had more, better writing materials. They had access to papyrus. They could afford parchment. These people are poor. They can afford that stuff. And so they used particular, like the main rib of your palm leaf. You can prepare it and make it into this long flat, like a really oversized popsicle stick almost is what they're kind of like about like a foot long, and you could fit quite a bit in there. So the centers of reading and writing, and most of the Arabic written material was from a Christian or Jewish context. This would have meant that anyone learning writing was being exposed more to Christian and Jewish thought, even if they weren't reading explicitly religious documents. So things were produced in a Christian or Jewish context, even if the content itself was not explicitly, it might not be a chapter of the Bible, but it still have some Christian overtones to it. And the concentration of monotheistic contacts in Banu Assad, because Banu Assad appears to have more monotheism or monotheistic leanings than anyone else, that may be linked to this. And Gordon Ranger says if you leave the Mormon church, they wedge you out of your magic underwear. Well, Muhammad apparently got rid of the magical underwear that the girls used to get in paganism because they got it whenever they menstruated, and he got rid of having to wait until after women had passed that milestone before you could marry them. So there was no point in them getting their a brand new underclothes to mark this occasion under Muhammad. So he did away with the magical underwear of the pagans
And why
to
did he
bring
do
in
that?
childhood.
She was 9 years old.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
All right, so I do have a couple quick comments here from the audience, just humorous comments. Polar Country says Muhammad was a British mole. Well, that explains it all. Morkay says the Spanish prophet, guacamole. And Jason says the British invented Sunni Islam, paganism, and of course, Christmas trees. Finally, before we even got started, Jack Ray left a super chat.
Who ate the apple? You ate the apple. The whole apple. Yes, the whole apple. You ate it. But a small seed, you left it. You put it back into the earth. What happened? Allah, through His power, caused that to grow and to give you how many apples? Thousands.
Thousands of apples, but I don't actually think Jack is watching. I think he just left that comment and then went and did something else because I haven't seen any other comments from. But when you see this later, Jack, you got the animation you wanted, and thanks for the donation.
his favorite.
All right, back to you.
All right. So a major source for this is an article by Michael Lecker called "The Monotheistic Cousins of Khadija," and then I did a bunch of reading in the Islamic sources and had done a bunch. And that this is just for the first three folks who are in that. The slaves are not in this particular article, but it's a good one. You should read it. All right. So here's the supposed background for the four Meccan Hanifs who supposedly agreed together that they were no longer going to follow the religion of their fathers and they were instead going to go after Abraham. So here we go. One day, when the Quraysh had assembled on a feast day to venerate and circumambulate the idol to which they offer sacrifices, this being a feast which they held annually, four men drew apart secretly and agreed to keep their counsel in the bonds of friendship. They were Waraqa ibn Nawfal, they were Abde Ubaidullah ibn Jahash, and hang on one second. Let me find it. Uthman ibn al-Huwayrith, and then Zayd ibn Amr. Now, you might notice that number 1 and 3, their granddads were Assad. So they're the two that we're talking about this time, right? It says they were of the opinion that their people had corrupted the religion of their father Abraham, and the stone they went around was of no account. It could neither hear, nor see, nor hurt, nor help. Find for yourselves a religion, they said, for by Allah you have none. So they went their several ways in the lands, seeking Hanafiya, the religion of Abraham. So my question is, what yearly feast did the Quraysh have? What do you think that yearly feast was, Thaddeus?
Something pagan, perhaps?
Uh, well, maybe like something called a Hajj?
Yes.
And what do you think they circled around, Thaddeus? What were
A Kaaba, perhaps?
Yes. And was there a stone in that Kaaba that can neither hurt nor help?
I think there
Nor
might
see?
have been.
Yes, indeed. So apparently they didn't like the worship at the Kaaba at the time. However, they had zero belief that they were descendants of Abraham at this time. It is very clear in the sources that whenever Muhammad declared, "Oh, I'm a descendant of Abraham through Ishmael," everyone went, "What are you talking about? We only know about Adnan. What are you smoking, dude? We are not. We have never heard of this Abraham before. being related to us. What are you talking about? So no, they did not go, oh, we are going to find our father Abraham, because there were no Meccans at the time who believed that they were related in any way to Abraham. Rather, Muhammad started saying that he was related to Abraham when the Jews of Medina said, you can't be a prophet because you are not from Israel. You are not from Isaac, and the prophets are from Isaac. You are from Ishmael, Abraham's other son. And Muhammad's response is, "Oh, if we're from Ishmael, then we can too be a prophets because Abraham is a prophet, so then we could all be prophets." And there is, and I've shown it before. There is a verse or a series of verses in the Quran where Muhammad takes the statement of Moses about God raising up, or actually God's statement, "I will raise up from among you, from among your brothers, another prophet," etc., etc. And that double, "from among you, from among your brothers," is even replicated in the Quran, but the speech is moved to Abraham's mouth as if Abraham had asked for the same thing, concerning Ishmael, as if that was authentic from the Torah, is basically what he's saying. Oh, the Torah totally says that Ishmael would also be the father of a prophet, even though, of course, it says no such thing. Yes,
Great comment here
Abraham.
from Nina.
Yes,
Father
Abraham
Abraham had many sons,
Mhm.
but Allah couldn't have one because he has no girlfriend.
Not only that, but Iblis also has children without having a girlfriend. So Iblis can do what Allah cannot. All right.
Yes, because his knees can do the work, right? At least we won't get into that though.
Yeah.
But just
There
remember that. Good.
there is a hint of authenticity with the word Hanif, because Hanif comes from a term used in Syriac or Aramaic for heathens. And you would never call yourself a heathen willingly, but it's called a specific sort of heathen. A sort of heathen who is not a regular sort of polytheist, but you might be a Gnostic or some sort of other thing that where you can't use the word like a pagan one who worships idols necessarily. So something that is a criticism of a heathen, of someone opposed to God, is adopted by them as authentic. And I don't think that would have happened in the later periods, because if they were in heavy contact with people up there, if you were in heavy contact with people up there, you would know that what the word meant in the context of that culture. And by the time the Abbasids were compiling everything, they did have a lot of heavy contact with these folks. So they would not have made or borrowed a term that was essentially saying that they are inauthentic, that they're heretics. And yes, Uzochi, I don't know, Dimka, or anyway, whoever you are, yes, Iblis has children. He has children because he has a male part in one thigh and a female part in the other thigh, and his two legs have intercourse, and then he lays an egg. And out of that egg flies a number of demons whenever it hatches. And that is how Iblis has children.
And poor country got the reference, even though I said we weren't going to go into it, because he said Allah can't have any children because he only has one leg.
Because he doesn't have two thighs. Oh my gosh, I'm so dead. That's amazing. That is amazing. That is the joke of the night. Okay. So again, Waraqa and Uthman are the two people who concern us here. Now here's another version. It's from Urwa ibn al-Zubair. And he says that they are part of a small group, Nafar, that met at the annual festival dedicated to an unspecified idol. At night, they found the idol thrown down on its face. And this is obviously one that's more embroidered from the last one that declares that there, is an idol, and it's trying to make it be like, nope, definitely not the Kaaba they're circling around. Nobody would ever reject that. That's authentically monotheistic. So anyway, at night they found the idol thrown upon its face. They reinstated it, but collapsed time and again. It was Uthman, that's Ibn Huwayrith, who realized that the momentous event had taken place, and indeed Muhammad was born that night. When the four reinstated the idol, a mysterious voice declared from within it the idol's demise following Muhammad's birth. The rest of the account regarding the quest of the four Hanafiya, the religion of Abraham, in which no special role is given to Uthman, is more or less familiar from other sources. Waraqa embraced Christianity and read the holy books until he became erudite. Uthman went to the Byzantine emperor, embraced Christianity, and gained from the emperor an honorable rank. And then there are the others, but we're not concerned with them right now. All right. So let's talk about the supposedly Christian Waraqa ibn Nawfal ibn Assad. So remember, he is the son of the brother of Khadija's father. So they're all paternal cousins of one another. He is consistently described as being Christian according to Islamic sources. Even his sister's Christian connections are utilized to make Muhammad's birth seem more miraculous. So she's the one who supposedly sees Muhammad walking around, and she sees a light above him, and she goes, oh, or not Muhammad, Abdullah, please come in and have sex with me. And he goes, no, my father has told me to come here. And then whenever he passes by again, he's like, hey, why don't you want me to have sex with you anymore? And she's like, oh, you used to have a light, and I wanted that light, but now the light's gone. Yes, the authentic Christian self-prostitution, all right? But this is supposed to show how authentically true Muhammad is as being recognized by someone with this Christian connection, to want to be impregnated by him. It's just amazing. Absolutely amazing quality stuff here. Not pagan at all, not magical sort of stuff at all. No, not pagan. Anyway, Waraqa is the authority upon which Muhammad's authenticity as a prophet depends. Muhammad thought he was getting oppressed by a demon. That was Muhammad's honest belief from his experience. Khadija convinced him to go to Waraqa, and he is the one who has the knowledge, the authority, and the expertise in Islam to diagnose what his condition is. So he needs to be Christian because he needs to have this in his prophecies, supposedly, in the text. Oh, you're the one. You're totally legit. You're just like the others, that kind of thing. He needs to have that authority, or else Muhammad is just a guy who got squeezed by a demon, whose wife told him, oh, it's not a demon, and he convinced himself it wasn't. So, people would also stupidly claim that he's an Nestorian or even an Nestorian priest. And in fact, some of the Islamic sources will even say, oh, and then he became a priest, as if you could go, oh, look, I put oil on myself. I'm a priest now. Look at me. I'm a priest. Yeah, that's how that works, right?
Oh, I mean, it works about the same way as, all these converts to Islam who were priests before they converted. They're, of course, always self-declared as such. Rachel wanted to know if that's where the light myth came from. Probably referring to the other light myth, the one about Muhammad's mother's vagina shining forth a light that could be seen hundreds of miles or hundreds of kilometers away as she gave birth to Muhammad.
Yep, she got the light. It's in the same narrative, but then she
all
has
right,
the
then.
light.
Yes, they probably are related.
Yeah, so it is related. Yep.
Excellent,
So,
excellent.
um, uh, Waraqa and Ibn Ishaq. He, so, this is the text there. He attached himself to Christianity and studied its scriptures until he had thoroughly mastered them. Ubaidullah went on searching until et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't matter what he did. And so this is Khadija going to consult with Waraqa, and it says that he had become a Christian and he read the scriptures and learned from those that followed the Torah and the gospel. So this is, how authentic he is, right? So now notice again that his full name is, if you just keep going, Waraqa ibn Nawfal ibn Assad ibn Abl. So that's a pagan god's name. So for those who want to claim that they both come from purely monotheistic lines, odd running around with the pagan god's name saying that you're the servant of the pagan god. But that's fine. So anyway.
Naughty scientist living up to his name. So she was, quote unquote, flashing her vagina?
Nice. Nice.
Perhaps.
So
all right.
Now we have Aisha, who told Allah's messenger, who told that Allah's messenger was questioned about Waraqa, and Khadija said to him, "He believed on you, but died before you appeared as a prophet." Allah's messenger then said, I was shown him in a dream wearing white clothes, and if he had been one of the inhabitants of hell, he would have been wearing different clothing. So, according to this, Waraqa believed in him, but then he died before he appeared as a prophet. So Muhammad was not a prophet, yet Waraqa believed in him. And so the extent to which he was not a prophet left questions about whether or not he would be in hellfire or not. So a question about this is, in what way was Muhammad not appearing as a prophet during the life of Waraqa before he died? Does this reflect his lack of monotheistic practice early on, that he was not a full prophet yet because he was not yet staying away from idols? Is that's what's meant there? That he was still doing shirk, so he is not a manifested prophet showing the true way because he's not entirely on the path yet? Now, note that all Christians before Muhammad are supposed to be in Jannah. Why would some special dispensation be needed for Waraqa? And it is needed because it says, I was shown him in a dream wearing white clothes, and if he had been one of the inhabitants of hell, he would have been wearing different clothing. Now, aside from Muhammad saying that the people in Jannah wear green, we have this question as to why is there any question? If he was a true Christian and the right kind of Christian, and if he died before Muhammad's coming, then he would have been among those who ought to be guaranteed Jannah as followers of Aisha. And if he died after, then he endorsed Muhammad and followed him, so there should not be any question at all. Now, the real reason that there might have been a question and people were asked is because in reality, Waraqa, he was a buffet mystic, and he wasn't really a Christian at all. He was a wise man sorcerer with a semi-magical power of fluent reading and writing who did lots of mystical stuff. And among the mystical stuff he did was stuff tangentially related to Christianity and Judaism. It wasn't that he was an eclectic, I'm the guy who knows all the magic stuff. I have all the powers. I have all the hidden knowledge. I'm the guy to ask questions. He was not an authentic Christian. That's why there is some kind of question. So there's also a question in the sources as to whether or not he was reading the scriptures or he was writing the scriptures. So here's one where it says, Waraqa had been converted to Christianity in the pre-Islamic period and used to write Arabic and write of the gospel in Arabic as much as Allah wished him to write. He was an old man and lost his eyesight. And another one says that he who during the pre-Islamic period became a Christian and used to write the writing with Hebrew letters. He would write from the gospel in Hebrew as much as Allah wanted him to write. He was an old man and had lost his eyesight. So is this like supposed to be a super uh, uh, spectacular thing, or is it saying that he could no longer do it? That's also a question. And then another one says she took him to her cousin who was a Christian convert and used to read the Gospels in Arabic. These are all Sahih al-Bukhari, by the way. So
That means all of these must be true. So apparently, Waraqa wrote the gospel in Hebrew, and read the gospel in Arabic. I do not see any problem with any of those statements.
why not, right? So here's a question.
Yeah.
What is this Injil of Waraqa? What is it? If he is reading it in Arabic, what is he reading? The Injil does not exist in Arabic at this time. The Arabic alphabet is not even all that old at this time either. Alternatively, Waraqa is writing the Injil either in Arabic or in Hebrew as much as Allah willed him to write. This does not indicate a translation, but heavenly downloads, because each time it's accompanied with that phrase, as much as Allah willed him to write. There needs to be an action of Allah willing him to write the Injil in Arabic or in Hebrew. So the question is Waraqa himself a prophet? If he isn't, why isn't he a prophet? He is getting empowered by Allah. As much as Allah willed him to write, he is getting empowered by Allah to write Arabic, or to write the Injil in some language in which the Injil does not exist at this time. Ibraniya is literally Hebrew. It's connected to this, and is connected in the story to Moses. It's like linked in the story thematically. It is not Syriac, which is a different language and a different letter system. And while Greeks would often conflate Aramaic and Hebrew, Semitic speakers did not confuse the two languages. There was no Hebrew Injil at this time either. So why is Waraqa writing in it? The story that connects Moses to Ibraniya, while Muhammad had no idea that Moses' folk and Abraham were in any way connected even though Muhammad had no idea that Moses' folk and Abraham were in any way connected for a decade or more of his prophethood. That means that this form of the story is a late version, even if Muhammad was authentically its source. So even if Muhammad is telling people this, the early parts of the Quran don't realize that Pharaoh's folk and Moses' folk are different people ethnically, and does not realize in any way that Moses is connected to Abraham. Muhammad doesn't learn this until he has more contact with the Jews of Medina. And so it is around the time of the Hijrah that he finally is informed of this fact, and there has to be some inserts into the text that's already been produced by Muhammad that corrects his errors and like pretends like he knew this all along. It's one of the reasons why I think that the Quran, that the parts of the Quran that we have now actually did come from the man Muhammad. I think that there were a whole bunch that were erased and deliberately lost. But what we do have is stuff that shows this kind of editing where he makes a mistake and then he inserts other stuff to try to cover the mistake but doesn't actually cover it. And this is one of the mistakes. So this version of the story, that if Ibraniya is something that Muhammad said at some point, then it's a late version of the story. If he said Arabiya, it could be an early version.
And I would agree that the fact that there's multiple of these stories, right? Multiple similar but different stories actually does suggest that it isn't being made up at the time of Sahih Bukhari anyway, right? That it definitely comes from earlier and very well could go back to Muhammad, but the details do seem to be confused, which uh, not that surprising because Muhammad himself was probably confused and probably told the story in multiple different ways because he was, after all, just making it up to begin with, since Waraqa obviously did not read or write the gospel in Arabic, Hebrew, or any other language.
So there are some like exact, lots of exact phrases, lots of exact sentences that show that there is literary dependence on these different stories. So they aren't actually different witnesses. They're different versions of the same witness that people have muddled with. So these someone in there corrected it or thought they were correcting it, either from Arabia to Ibra. What is it? Ibraniya, or from Ibraniya to Arabia. One way or another, somebody thought that they were correcting it and changed it and made an
Very
alteration.
good.
So
Thank you for
they
that
are they are
clarification.
dependent. Um,
So not
yeah.
multiple witnesses, right?
Yep.
But that still suggests that it is earlier, from an earlier period, if someone is taking the time to revise it and
Yeah.
correct it when it became embarrassing that Muhammad said something ridiculous.
You'd only have one version of the story if it was fabricated at that time.
Exactly.
Um,
Yes, it predates Bukhari for sure.
yeah. So Conociendo el Islam had a good question. Was Muhammad copying Waraqa, his ideas, or was Waraqa the real prophet of Islam and Muhammad took his text? I'm confused. Okay, well, this shows that Waraqa should have been called a prophet of the uh, of the Arabs because he was receiving some kind of direct download from Allah. He was Allah was willing him to write Injil in some language. So if Allah is willing him to write Injil in some language, that means that he is receiving revelation from Allah. He isn't just translating. And that is super important. And so this delegitimizes the entire Islamic idea that you should have um, that what you get is one messenger per language because you have Waraqa here already writing Injil in another language. It also goes against the whole, a prophet has to come to the people, with his own language, essentially. Well, Waraqa was coming with the Injil in another language than it was originally in. So it just undermines the story. Now, I do believe that Muhammad's initial theology was completely taken from Waraqa. Waraqa told him certain things, and we will get in when after Muhammad goes through his revelation and supposedly, meets Allah and all that, and then later claims it's Jibril. Whenever we go through that, we will talk about what his early theology was. But I do think that it came from Waraqa, and I don't think it's coherent because none of Islam is coherent.
And John has a question about your picture there. The individual seems to be writing with his left hand. Is that good in Islam?
Indeed, it is not. It was really funny because all of these AI dudes, they were all writing with their left hands. They all have the correct, probably the correct number of fingers, although this guy may be missing one pinky. It's hard to tell. But yeah, all of these AI generated dudes, I don't even know what that supposed candle he's got there is. It's absolutely ridiculous. But
I mean,
or
it's
what he's
pretty good.
even writing on. Why is it poofy? There's a lot of things that go wrong whenever you pay much attention to like any details.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty decent for an AI generated image. I actually didn't realize it was one, to give you credit for that. But yeah, he's like gripping the candle, which is really strange. And
That'll teach
that
it.
that paper definitely seems to be have it definitely has some writing on it, but it seems to be printed in a printing press, and yet he's writing it. So Some minor errors, but apparently the AI thinks that Muslims write with their left hand is the gist of it.
Yeah.
Trinity says that the Quran is truly a left-hand work. Only in this context, right, where we're saying that left is bad. Because, of course, there's nothing actually bad with writing with your left hand. Just Allah has a problem with left hands, which is why he has two right hands, because the left hand is the dirty hand, and he can't have one of those, except according to one Sahih narration where he has a left hand as well, so
He has
perhaps
three
he has
hands.
three
Come
hands.
on. Obviously. Why would he not?
Mhm.
Why would he not have the best of hands? All three. Right? All right.
Exactly.
Because it doesn't actually say both his hands are left. It's the dual form. So his two hands are left hands. But it doesn't say anything about his third hand. His third hand is, or excuse me, our right hands. His third hand's the left hand. Clearly. Clearly. So, so Islam does not recognize Waraqa as being a prophet, but by their own standard of prophethood, he had to have been a prophet. And while Muhammad said, if there was a prophet, might have said, if there was to be a prophet after me, it would be Umar. He may have said that, but they don't believe that he actually was a prophet after him. They do claim, keep in mind, the caliph, the early caliphate claimed the same authority of abrogation as Muhammad did over Islamic law, and some Islamic law in Sunni Islam comes from the caliphs. It does not come from Muhammad. Muhammad abrogated, or the caliphs abrogated the laws of Muhammad, and the first four were considered legitimate in doing so, and it is in all Sharia things that they introduced and things that they changed. Shia Islam took that same kind of authority for their imams. So they both have this far beyond human authority built into their systems. It's just easy to miss it in the Sunni system because the Sunnis pretend that they didn't have this as a standard, but it's very clear that they did in Sharia and where things come from. So here are some questions about Waraqa's Injil that continue. So Waraqa has access only to the Injil, but somehow he talks about the Namus, which means law. It doesn't mean angel. Al-Tabari is the one who glossed it as angel. He, from Waraqa himself, he only said law. I don't know how an angel could be a law. That's ridiculous. But law. The law that came to Moses, and that's because Allah doesn't know that Christians have the Torah as well as the Injil. Allah thinks that Christians exclusively use and have the Injil, and that this Injil has mostly the same contents as the Torah plus some updates, as if we download the Kitab 3.5, revising it from 3.0, and Islam is 4.0, like the Quran is
Uh-huh.
4.0. So the Quran is supposed to contain within it everything that is in the Injil and the Torah, in terms of that hasn't been abrogated, in terms of all the history, in terms of all the details, in terms of all of that stuff. It's supposed to have all of that plus the newest version of the law. That's what it's supposed to have according to Allah. Allah doesn't know what's in any of these sacred scriptures. Allah also doesn't think that information can be spread across languages. And remember that there's a time whenever Muhammad is accused of taking things from someone. He's like, oh, that person. And Allah says, he can't be taking it from someone else. That person doesn't even speak Arabic. And this is in pure Arabic. So it's clearly not for him. So Allah doesn't think the translation works. So what the heck is Waraqa getting of the Injil in a different language? How is this working? Every people needs their own kitab version direct from Allah. So if it's just the Injil, but even in Arabic, it would be illegitimate because that can't happen in Allah's mind. You have to have a new updated version from a new updated prophet. So it's very puzzling what Muhammad and Allah think about the fact that the Injil is Greek, Syriac, and Ethiopic in the areas surrounding Muhammad. Like, he should know. He knows that the Abyssinians are Christian. He knows that the Greeks, whom he calls Romans, but the Greek-speaking people, that they're Christians. He identifies them as Christians. And yet he thinks that every person needs a book inherently in their own language brought to them by their own prophet. So was there like Asa 2.0 who came and did exactly the same things, but in Ethiopic? Like, what's going, like, it does not hold together. Nothing that Muhammad taught makes any sense whatsoever. And only the fact that these people were desperately inbred and virtually illiterate allowed him to fool people the way he did. He was very charismatic, and they were very, very not bright. And so they didn't stop and think for 3 seconds how ridiculous it is for him to be saying that every people needs their own prophet. And yet he acknowledges that the Abyssinians are Christians, and the people in Najran, they're Christians. They're Arabic speakers. And the people, why do they need a different prophet? And the people and the Greeks are Christian, but somehow they need someone else, right? Yes, I like that. I like Jack Ray's. I guess you could hit a button and you can, if the wrong version gets, you go off of a new branch off the main tree and it has issues, you can revert to your snapshot that was actually accurate. That's what they need to do. They need to hit the button. They need to revert back to the Injil snapshot, and then they would fix all the problems. So come back to Christianity and don't deal with this corrupted, messed up download that just didn't work right. Somehow, whenever it was put on GitHub, it was corrupted. So.
And I actually have an answer to how we can do that, because Nina found a loophole. Muhammad might be the last prophet, but that doesn't mean a prophetess can't come after him. And Nina says that she is the last prophetess, and we must obey. She has a new book, which she didn't actually specify, but which I'm hoping is the restored Bible that is no longer corrupted by Muhammad.
All right, so now note also that Waraqa does not actually authenticate Jibril in any of these versions. Only the visions of the book that Muhammad saw. That's the law. This is the same law that came to Moses. What is the law that came to Moses? Tablets. So Muhammad saw some sort of writing that he couldn't decipher in his sleep paralysis demon vision. And so Waraqa said, oh, look, that's like what Moses happened. Moses totally got squished by a demon in a cave and saw some stuff he couldn't read on magical books. So that's totally the same. Then in the 16th century, Al-Halabi made up the excuse that Waraqa had been Jewish before he was Christian and thus knew about Moses. But even he seems deeply confused about what books Christians have as the scripture, because Allah is confused. Because Al-Halabi understands that the Injil does not contain the Torah, so he feels like he has to make up a reason why Waraqa knows about Moses. Whereas Allah back then thought that the Injil had Moses in it, and the description of those, the giving of the commandments and everything was like spelled out again. So even his attempt at saving this from total incoherence is also muddled. Because, of course, Christians actually have the Torah and the Injil, but he can't say that because that's not what's being said here, and that's not what is traditionally taught in Islam. So Waraqa had other close relatives who were known to be literate. His brother and his brother's wife, who is also from the Assad, Banu Assad, they were known to be literate as well. So that's a lot of reading in that group, beyond the mere being able to puzzle out words that the vast majority of people had. I like that. Mo was a special ed prophet to people with learning disabilities. So I will leave you with this for a moment to look at while I get more to drink. So,
Awesome. I have some comments from along the line that I can read while we're doing that. But first, Nina is telling us more about her new religion that she's founding as the last prophetess. The religion's name is Pislam, and anyone who follows Pislam is a Muslim. And in case you're not convinced, Isa was a Muslim, and Muhammad was a Muslim as well. So there you go. She's declared it. You should convert to that new religion. Earlier, Jack Ray said, when Muhammad was born, someone saw that awful light and said, "What the hell?" And the guy next to him said, "Yes." I chuckled a bit, perhaps audibly or at least visibly, when I read this earlier. So if you're wondering why, it was when I read this comment. Jason says, Hadith have a lot of contradictions. Like what you did there. Very excellent pun. Jack Ray gave a super chat.
Early, and this is indeed a sign, yet most of them are not believers. Give alone to Allah, give alone to Allah. Ride the wings of Gabriel, give alone to Allah.
Allah needs your loans. And I thank you for the loan that you've given me, which, just like the ones to Allah, will never be repaid. Thank you very much for that support. One more comment, just totally random here from Jason, polyamorist, polytheist. Of course, he's describing Muhammad.
nice. Nice. All right. So, we're now going to talk about the guy who is super important that you probably haven't heard of. How many people in the chat, just let me know if you've heard much about Uthman ibn al-Huwayrith, the grandson of Assad.
I've certainly heard the name, but that's about all I could tell you.
Yeah, I've mentioned him a couple of times, but yeah.
Perhaps I've only heard it from you. I'm not sure
Yep.
if I heard it before you or not, but I definitely have not heard much of anything about him.
If you read Ibn Ishaq, it's part of that beginning where, like, he's talking about all these weird people and all these weird things and all these things that didn't happen historically, and your eyes are crossing, and you're like, can we just get to Muhammad, please? And, like, so I can find out about Islam. But it's important. And we will see how important it actually was. His interests, as expressed in the sources, were primarily political. Now, here's a picture of the map that will show the different associations. So, goodness, red is Roman associated, purple with Aksum, that's the Abyssinians, and green is the Sassanid or Sasanians and their empire. So you will see how that how these different political figures lined up, and the kingdom of Aksum and the Roman Empire were allied. So they were allied with one another. And so Mecca was heavily concerned with achieving and maintaining its independence from, no, not being conquered, essentially. It doesn't want to be smashed by one of these great powers. In Muhammad's mind, the Abyssinians were as much a great power, and in the mind of all the Meccans, not just Muhammad, but the Abyssinians were as powerful as the Sassanid Empire and the Roman Empire. They were, so he felt like they were squeezed between three great powers of the entire world, and they're in the middle. So, what are they going to be doing here? What's going on? You know, how are they going to survive these different groups who are fighting with each other through this area? How are they going to not get squashed like a bug? Now, note that the Jews were specifically associated nearest to Mecca with the Sassanids. So they were heavily allied with them, even though it has Tama as being in kind of the neutral zone there. Both Tama and Khaybar were somewhat leaning toward the Sassanid Empire and were somewhat associated and friendly with them because they would rather be friendly with them than friendly with the Christians. Um, so to be secure, they needed some kind of alliance. Now, Muhammad's uh, great grandfather Hisham, um, he had gotten these kind of letters of safe conduct from both North and South uh, that kind of allowed them to run this system where they were not molested too excessively by any of the tribes because both uh, both Yemen, the powers in Yemen and the Roman Empire recognized their legitimacy. But they didn't really have any explicit protection from anyone or for anyone, right? Um, so uh, to be to be actually secure, you need an alliance. And to have an alliance on equal footing, like where you were heavily respected and you're not just kind of a lesser alliance of convenience, you had to be a co-religionist with the person that you're allying with so they see you as a true brother and not just as a convenient person to go with. So Uthman wanted them to become a Christian power. This is Ibn al-Huwayrith, not Ibn Affan. Al-Huwayrith, he wanted them to become a Christian power that was recognized by Rome. And one other thing in this picture that was not entirely accurate is that the Sassanid Empire actually controlled the Hadramaut as well. So they controlled that southern section too. So there really was very little that was kind of no man's land. So here's the question. So how do you do that? You become a Christian and say, hey, Rome, we're Christian now. Let's be buddies. Let's be equal. Or if we become Christian, can we be buddies? Which is really more what he went with. So he is accused of wanting to be king in the sources. This is likely false. He almost succeeded in his goal. That is agreed with by everyone. There's one version where he even succeeds for a while, although that one seems to be like a total late fabrication. 1 second. Whew.
So yeah, real quick,
Mhm.
since you paused there, Houston wants to know if this is the same Uthman who burned
No.
the Quran, and no, this is a different Uthman for sure.
That's why I keep calling him Ibn Huwayrith, because I want to emphasize that this is not the Uthman who will become a caliph. So there isn't really any sort of context in which a king from the tribe of Assad would make any sense. They were not important enough. They were not influential enough, neither as religious nor as political leaders. The Banu Makhzum would never have agreed to that. And because he almost succeeded, or actually did succeed for a while in one version, that indicates that he wasn't trying to be king, because nobody would have they would have gotten a ton of people go, yeah, that sounds good. If that's what he had been trying to do. It seems more likely that he was a vizier or ambassador or the kitab for the tribe in his negotiations, and that this was kind of the role that he was taking as a representative, and was being dealt with as a representative, not as a king. And by the way, we have an Arab AI king there wearing completely impossible clothing, but why not?
Yeah, looks like he's got some warrior armor on.
Yeah, except it's like soft at points and turns into cloth magically.
Uh-huh.
It's like armor on his shoulders, but then also cloth at the same time. It's very odd. Anyway, so this one, one of the versions of the story says Uthman, who was among the most clever, intelligent Qurayshis, desired to become king of the Quraysh. He headed for the Byzantine emperor, having become aware of their need of Quraysh's need for the emperor and of their trade in his land. He mentioned Mecca to the emperor and aroused his appetite for it. He said, "It will extend your kingdom, just as the Sassanian emperor became king of Sana'a, uh, extending his own kingdom, as Sana'a being Yemen, right? He, the emperor, made him their king and wrote for him a letter addressed to them," is supposedly what happened. Having secured the emperor's recognition, he was sent back to Mecca on a she mule with a golden saddle, which is a description of an imperial postal service steed, and had a letter of recognition sealed in gold. The fabricated version is belied by a more accurate admission that he was called Albitric, which is Latin patricius, which was a rank, or patricius, sorry, classical folks who want to pronounce it the classical way, which was a rank when given to outsiders for allied military commanders. So it recognized him as having like a command type of authority. Um, it's a new version of the patrician rank, basically. It is beyond improbable that the emperor was crowning him, because like how could he just like crown him? How would that make him? Well, how would that bring Mecca under his control if he didn't have authority? Oh, I'll give you authority. Hey, Thaddeus, I hereby make you king of China.
Woo!
Oh, and I mean, like it makes no sense. Even if it were the president of the United States telling some dude randomly, no military backup, hey, you're king of South Africa now. Like just because no, it makes no sense, right? It
Yeah,
rather
it's like those
yeah,
people who just like randomly declare themselves to be the true ruler of some sovereign state, and no one pays any attention to them, right? It's
right.
basically exactly the same as that.
And he'd also be annoying the people that he's supposedly wanting to ally with if he did such a thing. Why would he do that? It seems much more likely that he was recognizing him as having the authority that he was already sent with. So,
Just real quick, Karen says that she's confused and as asking if Uthman ibn al-Harith is Muhammad's grandfather. So this is
no,
a cousin of Khadija, so roughly the same age as Muhammad, give or take, 10 years.
yep. So again, Assad, the Assadi clan, that is Khadija's clan. This is Muhammad's wife's cousin, paternal cousin, uh, grandfather's son's sons, or in her case, daughter. But it's through that paternal line that they are related, so they're from the same clan. So they're still talking about Khadija's other cousin. We've already talked about Waraqa ibn Nawfal ibn Assad. Now we're talking about Uthman ibn al-Huwayrith ibn Assad. So this is the Assadi clan who appear to be the Kitab clan of the Quraysh, meaning that they, as the Kitab clan, they were the ones who were recording marriages and contracts and things like that in writing. And because they did more writing, there seems to be a lot more monotheists in this group than there are in the general run of the Quraysh. So, to seal the deal between the Meccans and the and uh, the emperor, Uthman needed to bring back gifts to him. So here's a question: if you're going to bring gifts to the emperor that are, representative of your people, and you are a fabulous, rich trading town, do you bring leaves that are used for vegetable tanning, some clarified butter, and a rawhide?
Well, those are definitely things that you would trade, but they're not like the prestigious things, they're not like perfume or incense or something along those lines. They're just like common everyday objects that are valuable or at least useful in trade, but they don't mark something as being like a great town for sure.
Right. And these are chosen because these would be the representative products of Mecca. Mecca is a place where its produce, the things that it had to trade, were materials for tanning, leather, and clarified butter. And it is said in other places that Meccans were the only group who did not consider it too far beneath them to trade their clarified butter rather than keeping it all for themselves. So this is something that is somewhat unique to Mecca. So this represents Mecca's actual trade produce. This is what they traded. They were not a hub where everyone came to them with the fabulous wealth of nations. No, they produced things that they produced commodity level materials, particularly leather, because they had that big sacrifice every year. They would get all the leather from that sacrifice from the people who had sacrificed their animals at that time, and they'd be able to trade that with Rome. All right, so
And trading hides is certainly a very common thing to do. And it's apparently what they had, because as you said in just now, but also in previous episode, talked about in great detail how people would bring their animals and sacrifice them there, and then they would sell the hides, and this was their main form of sustaining themselves, was selling the hides of sacrificed animals.
and you'll notice that there are huge numbers of women who appear to be that their main job is tanning leather. In most societies, you'll find women either spinning or weaving or doing both all the time, like in their spare time. If you sat and talked, you were weaving or spinning. Well, it seems like these women of Mecca were all like huge numbers of them. Everybody worked leather. That's just what they did, and that's probably why. And the reason why leather would be of particular importance to Rome is that their armies used up enormous amounts of leather. So, excuse me. In one account, the Quraysh had decided to put a diadem on his head and make him look extra important when he got back. But this appeared to be a step too far in that particular version. Someone objected, saying that the Quraysh were laqah, meaning that they neither had kings over them nor submitted to kings, that they were a free tribe, and that they shouldn't bind themselves to Rome in this way as something other than a free tribe. Then you would have an emperor, right? So Ibn al-Huwayrith was opposed in some of the versions. His main opposition was a guy named Abu Zama al-Aswad ibn al-Mutalib ibn Assad. So he is another Assadi, even though he's Ibn al-Mutalib. That is not the Mutalib. Oh, I spelled Mutalib wrong. Oh well. He's not the Mutalib who is the brother of Abdullah Mutalib, son of Hisham, but rather is another Assadi. So he's from Assad also, right? Another grandson of Assad. He was also, Abu Zama was also an opponent of Muhammad, and his sons were killed at the Battle of Badr, along with his grandson Al-Harith, who was also killed at the Battle of Badr, fighting against Muhammad. So this guy is against Ibn al-Huwayrith, and he will be against Muhammad as well. One version has him making this declaration as the people are circling the Kaaba. Now, why would it be that he would be suddenly object to them all becoming Christian while circling the Kaaba? Can you go and circle the Kaaba and bow to a stone there if you're a Christian?
No. Well, I mean, I guess you could technically do that, but you would be in defiance to God's law if you did.
Yes, that is not a very Christian act. So they'd have to give up their beloved Kaaba. Now, of course, they can't admit that this is true in these sources because, again, Muhammad is presenting himself as being Kitab 4.0. So he is the newest, greatest, updated version. But this is ridiculous, right? Because neither the Christians nor the Jews would be okay with circling this pagan temple, and was probably that being the context of this is, enlightening. Other accounts have the opposition led by Abu Uhayya Uhayha and al-Walid ibn al-Mughira of the Makhzum clan over issues of taxation and customs, particularly. And these two were great traders. They were trade focused more than anything else. Other Assadis who didn't support Ibn Huwayrith were Khadija's brothers, Adi, who's the guy who was also literate, and he became a Muslim after the conquest, and Naufal. And that's not Waraqa's dad, it's just another dude with the same name. Because remember, Waraqa's dad was the son of Assad, and this is a grandson of Assad, right? Who was also killed at Badr fighting against Muhammad. So Khadija's brother died at Badr fighting against Muhammad. Also, Khadija's cousins Abu Hisham, Hakim ibn Hizam, and he's the dude who bought Zayd ibn al Harith, or excuse me, ibn Haritha, who became Muhammad's slave Zayd. That Zayd. So the dude who originally brought Zayd and gave him to Khadija was an opponent of Ibn al-Huwayrith, and Tuwait ibn Habib also opposed him, and Tuwait ibn Habib is his grandfather was also Assad as well. So these are all Assadis. So again, as I said, he was accused of wanting to be a king. That's slightly false. Oh wait. I should have deleted that part. But anyway, according to Lecker, Uthman's attempt to control Mecca, it took place during the 2.5 decades of Muhammad's marriage to Khadija, or perhaps on the eve of the Hijrah after her death. And his reasoning is that only uniting against Muhammad in Medina kept a feud from breaking out as a result of the outfall in one of the accounts. It's probably during the marriage of Khadija due to the ages of everyone involved, but it seems way more likely that it's before Muhammad declared himself to be a prophet, because there is no interaction in the sources between Muhammad as a prophet and his claims and Ibn Huwayrith. Like there would have been some sort of Ibn Huwayrith also denied him, or Ibn Huwayrith thought he was the hot stuff and totally knew that it was, there would have been some sort of interaction in the sources between Muhammad's claims of prophethood and something that Ibn Huwayrith did if he was quite important, and Muhammad was also claiming to be a prophet at the same time. So I think that it was actually before then. Whether or not the feud is accurately reported, it was still, the actual events were actually earlier, I believe. So what would the Qurayshi position have been to this invitation that everybody converts to Christianity? Some of the late stories say that he wanted to place Mecca under tolls, customs, or fees, and that's why the Qurayshi folks rebelled. However, it's beyond ludicrous to suppose that they were not already paying the very same customs that literally everyone who traded with Rome had to pay. They didn't have some special, I don't have to pay customs. Furthermore, in the sources, they themselves usually placed customs on foreign merchants who wanted to trade in Mecca. They got the material from the wrecked ship to rebuild the Kaaba after it was destroyed, according to the sources, by making a deal with the captain that he didn't have to pay customs when he traded in Mecca, as long as they could have his free, they could have the wrecked ship that couldn't be repaired, all of its bits for free. And that was a deal. Why? Because there were customs in both directions. It's also moronic to suppose that Ibn al-Huwayrith wanted Meccans to pay more to the emperor. Makes no sense. So one version even said that he noticed that the emperor needed their trade goods, that's leather, and so he pushed for a deal. But most likely the Quraysh, they would have had to have paid Roman taxes, at least the poll tax, if they were inside the Roman system, while the custom duties would be canceled out. So they wouldn't have to pay custom duties anymore, but they would have to pay poll tax. This would convert what had been a two-sided, if unequal taxing system to a one-sided, though far more advantageous system. And the reason why I said if it was unequal is that there's basically no Roman traders going to Mecca to try to trade with the Meccans. Nobody from Rome is wanting to trade with Meccans. They're not that important. But the Meccans are having to pay customs tax all the time. I think it's like 20%, because they were trading every single year. They would send a big caravan out to Syria, and whenever they passed a certain place, they would have their stuff evaluated and determine what the prices is, and then they'd have to pay cash at the border as customs dues, and that would be canceled out. And instead, according to this, what would happen is that they would pay a jizya. That's the term that's used, a jizya, for each clan when they went to trade, and that would have been, it didn't say explicitly, but that would have been in place of the customs dues. So it would be more advantageous in reality, but at the same time, it would have been more embarrassing because it would show that they were subjects of the emperor now. So this also brings up a point that this might have provided a background idea in Muhammad's mind when he invented the jizya, that they had almost paid this jizya, which wasn't actually customs. The jizya that he imposed is basically kind of like an income tax on everybody rather than the poll tax of the Roman Empire. A poll tax, literally, it means a head tax, so every single person pays the same amount just because they exist. So the jizya, as it is conceived in Islam, isn't the same as the Roman poll tax, but it may provide a background for Muhammad's decision that, hey, we're the overlords. Now everyone ought to pay us this jizya, this tax to us, because now we're the lords. So
Take a couple
go ahead.
comments here. Just nothing like directly related, but lots of funny things have been happening. So you declared me Emperor of China, and Nina, who has become the new prophetess, heard a bell and
There we
says,
go.
indeed, Thaddeus is king of China. Allah the Mouseiest told me. Thaddeus is the king of China that reverted to Islam. Then Andrew said, Emperor of China, Thad. And Jason said, Thaddeus, father of no one, king of China. So there you go. We have the confirmation from the last prophetess. That's all we need to know.
Yep. And I may have been, Hedgie just may be behind because it's delayed, right, for them, or I may need to explain again. So they were paying a customs duty, which was like 20% the value of the stuff that you were bringing into trade. And instead, they most likely would only pay a poll tax, which was a small amount of money for every person in Mecca. Because it did say in the source that was according to the clans, each of the clans would have to pay. And so the total amount would probably be quite a bit less, because the poll tax was really not that high in Rome. It was the inheritance taxes and other taxes that were much higher. So it probably would have been financially advantageous to the Meccans to go, yes, we will pay your toll tax instead, but because they saw it as a humiliation, they didn't want to do it. So, but there is a bigger real fatal flaw, and that's that the Quraysh, they derived their power from their 100% pagan pilgrimage site. Mecca is pagan. The Kaaba is pagan. That's why they had these trade fairs where they were able to make so much money, the local trade fairs, because they had people coming for their pagan site. If nobody's coming to Mecca anymore, how are they going to make money? And people can't be coming to Mecca if they can't have their pagan Hajj anymore. And they need money because they can't grow anything. They have to import all of their plant food. Wheat, everything has to be imported. They have to get it from other places because they do not have any. Now, it is true that Taif has had irrigation from the runoff from the mountains because the whole thing drops down, but there's still some runoff in the direction down the plateau, and so they did have irrigation there, and they were able to grow some grain. And some people in Mecca did own fields there. However, even if Taif had devoted all of their food to support Taif and Mecca, they couldn't feed everybody. They had to have more than that. So the real fatal flaw was that Mecca is a pagan pilgrimage site. They can't become Christian and still have enough money to feed themselves. So Uthman appears to have been betrayed by the Quraysh while he was in Syria in all the different versions. There are many different versions of the story, but the Qurayshi merchants who were in Busra used a guy called Amr ibn Jafna, and he seems to have probably been the Ghanasid ambassador and a brother of the Ghanasid king. Although the stories, they're really mixed up and muddled, and sometimes they make him a king of Al-Sham, which is totally made up. It's not a place, or a place or a tribe. But his dad was actually Abi Shamir, and so it seems to have just been a confused version of Abi Shamir turned to Al-Sham. The stories do agree that Ibn Jafna supplied Ibn al-Huwayrith. It's not his dad, but himself, Ibn al-Huwayrith, with a lying translator. But the emperor, now, of course, the emperor, where is he not? He is not in Bosra. He's not there. He's not in Bosra. The emperor is in Constantinople. But throughout all the early Islamic sources, all the Muslims are totally convinced that he's based in Syria and in Bosra in Syria. That's because apparently the governors just tricked the locals into thinking that they're the governor, so that kind of diffused certain threats to the or make them think that he's the emperor. That would have diffused threats to the actual emperor, because these people are so ignorant they don't even know where the actual emperor is. So this is happening in Busra. It's happening with the governor, and it keeps saying emperor because these people don't know where the emperor is. That is how ignorant they are. Again, this is not happening within the limes, within the borders of the Roman Empire. Because within the borders of the Roman Empire, if you lived there, you would know that your local authority is a governor and it's not the emperor. But anyway, because they're so confused, they think that this governor dude is the emperor. And he had in his retinue a native Arab speaker. Oh, imagine that. So he knew when the translator was lying and giving a false translation. Now, what happens later is that the Qurayshi are arrested, but Ibn Jafna is not. And some specifically, usually two names are mentioned, and one is specifically mentioned as having been ransomed and released, and then one of them had died in jail. So the stories are really stupid, where like this happens, and then the emperor decides he really likes Ibn al-Huwayrith and says, "Oh, you can arrest any from among your people that you like," and he chooses meanly to arrest two of them. That makes no sense. What makes sense is that these people went and tried to trick the governor. The governor's like, who's responsible for doing this? And Ibn Jafna was like, oh, well, they told me this, and da-da-da-da-da. And Ibn Jafna is politically important. These guys are not. Somebody needs to be held accountable. They get thrown into prison. That's what makes sense. It's just a muddled and ridiculous story in the form that it is, and it's completely incoherent, like all the stories are whenever something's embarrassing. But you can tell what actually makes sense in it, that if you have someone who got a translator to lie, you'd hold that person responsible. Now, many of the accounts say that Ibn Jafna eventually poisoned Ibn Huwayrith, but his motivations are ridiculous in these stories. And how the heck would anyone know? If you successfully poison somebody and you're just another dude, how would anyone know that you poisoned him? That's kind of the point of poisoning, is that people don't know that you did it. So it seems way more likely that he eventually died a natural death. So Other accounts just say he lived in the Byzantine court. After that, as a Christian, died whenever, natural death, right? So, in some of the accounts, Ibn al-Huwayrith, he was already rejected by his people and knew it, and then got mad at the Qurayshi merchants in Syria, and for some idiotic reason, the emperor let him throw 2 of them in jail again. This is one of the ones in which, like, why is he going to the emperor and like asking and saying, "Oh yes, indeed, we agree and we submit to you"? If they don't, like, what's the end game for that? And then after one of them died, Ibn al-Huwayrith in this version, he asked for the release of the other. He like arranged for the release of the other. Well, it only makes sense that he would want the other one to be released if he was not the one who threw them in jail in the first place. So again, most likely the king punished the politically insignificant people for trying to trick him, not the king, not even the emperor, the governor in reality. And Ibn al-Huwayrith really did intervene, but he intervened to, save a person from Mecca. But I think that the sources just don't want to portray him that nicely, and they don't want to be really forthright about the dirty deed that they did him, betraying him, rather than sending a messenger to say, no, now that you've left, these other people have persuaded us to something different. We've changed our mind. And instead, essentially, probably trying to get the king to kill him by acting like he's saying ridiculous things, or the governor to kill him. So I think the Meccans were just embarrassed by their extraordinarily ridiculous, underhanded, slimy behavior and al-Huwayrith's nobility, and so tried to like obscure the story and just made it really stupid. And then there's a particularly ridiculous version that says Ibn al-Huwayrith was in fact made king by Ibn Jaffna. Who's this guy who has the authority to just declare people kings, and even ruled for some time, and that he imposed a toll, kharj, on every clan. But then the Quraysh complained to Ibn Jaffna that he was light-witted, and Ibn Jaffna then invaded Mecca and overthrew Ibn Huwayrith. Then the deception at the Byzantine court happened anyway, and then an eventual poisoning. I mean, it just got really ridiculous. And in this version, Waraqa is not a Christian at this time. He's merely a monotheist. He then writes poems against the killing of Ibn al-Huwayrith, and Ibn Jaffna wants to kill him for it. So Waraqa flees to the land of the Tay, some of whom were Christian, and then to Bahrain, where the Christian faith entered his heart. That's an excuse to get Waraqa to an actual Christian education, because he wasn't a caravaner. He didn't leave the area. So how on earth could he have known anything authentic about Christianity other than just like collecting, buying any bits of paper that anybody, or any scrolls or anything that anybody had convenient? How could he know anything about Christianity? Well, they came up with this reason to like that he's traveling around so that he could become an actual Christian rather than clearly a fabricated, made-up Christian. So supposedly when Ibn Jaffna was no longer a threat to him, he went back to Mecca, and then around that time, the family of the Qurayshi who had died in jail in connection with the betrayal of Ibn Huwayrith, they caused a dispute over whether or not blood money was owed to them from the rest of the Assad clan. And the dispute about whether or not they were owed money or not was about to erupt into a bloody feud when they all united militarily against Islam. It's really unclear when they think that Waraqa died in this version. It's just a mess. So there are some questions about al-Huwayrith. I don't think that Waraqa was any kind of authentic Christian. I think he just collected any sort of religious texts, magical texts, any kind of anything that he could get his hands on. He collected them. But I think that Ibn al-Huwayrith, again, I didn't put his whole name, but anyway, that he was actually a professing Christian, that he most likely was. Now, was his Christianity at least partially political? Yeah, probably. Was he really just a religious opportunist? And that's an important question, because he could be like a professing Christian saying, yes, I am Christian, but actually just being a religious opportunist and not actually having faith. But I think probably not, because his boon companion, basically his best friend, Sheba ibn Rabia, Ibn Abshams, which is the parent of the Umayyad tribe, he became a Christian along with Ibn al-Huwayrith, and he remained a Christian apparently for the rest of his life. So Sheba, his friend, would not have retained a Christian identity when it was no longer politically expedient, because Ibn al-Huwayrith was kind of kicked out. But if he had been led to Christianity by his friend's faith, then he probably was an authentic Christian. And by the time Ibn al-Huwayrith came back from Rome as a Christian the first time, he would have actually had enough of an education that he could be an actual Christian. Now, and again, was he a knowledgeable Christian? It's certainly not before he went to the emperor's court, but there he would have been catechized, and so he would have become one. Now, note that one account claims that al-Huwayrith's mother was an Ethiopian slave. Usually the less flattering tradition is true, but not really when it comes to people who are seen as enemies of the Meccans. And Ibn al-Huwayrith was seen kind of as a Meccan enemy. He was threatening their strength and independence and nobility and stuff. So it was probably an insult, saying, oh, you're only a Christian because your mom was a Christian slave and she was an Ethiopian. She was black, because being black is an insult, right? So we are, even though we're only through two of the folks, we are very close, getting quite close to the end, because the rest are much easier and much less complicated. So
excellent. So before you go to the lesser known characters, did have a couple comments from Elizabeth. She came in late after you had finished talking about Waraqa, but I think now is a good time to take these. So Waraqa bin Nawfal, seemingly he is seen by Khadija and Muhammad as an authority in spiritual matters, and he is a cousin of his wife, and he is a Christian familiar with the scriptures, since after all he is making copies of the scriptures, whether for personal study or for a fellowship group or church of Christians.
yeah,
And then
please
she
tell me where it
quoted,
says. Please tell me where it says that he's making a copy. Tell me any place where it says that he's copying scriptures, because it doesn't.
yes,
It
good
says
point.
he is writing them according to the will of Allah, and it doesn't say that people read things according to the will of Allah, but he's writing them according to the will of Allah. So while you are, giving the standard Islamic narrative, as many might say, the reason why he is placed in the position of being an authentic Christian, even though there is zero evidence that he had or could have had authentic scriptures or much of any knowledge other than the bits and fragments that he had. And there is some incredible evidence that, in fact, he had stuff like, he probably had a hymn or a poem that contained references to things that were incomplete because of Muhammad's specific misunderstandings of things mentioned in scripture. Muhammad, in his early work, the only scripture that Muhammad ever knew is stuff that he knew from the beginning at the time of Waraqa, in terms of like actual textual kinds of knowledge. But none of it is firsthand stuff. None of it is contextual. They're all fragmentary, they're out of context, and they're misunderstood. For example, Muhammad knew, oh gosh, goodness, what's it called? Olivet Discourse of Jesus, where he's talking about what will happen at the end of time. Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah. And Muhammad knew that phrase. He knew that phrase. Do you know what he didn't know? Everything that comes after that. He did not know that the next part talks about that some will be taken and some will be left behind, and that it will come swiftly and without any warning. People will be marrying and giving a marriage, and this will come without warning. No, he does not know that that's the context, that is how it is in the days of Noah, that there will be no warning. Because he doesn't know that, he fills in the blanks. With what? With the animals pairing up. So in the Quran it says, and the souls will be paired. Because Muhammad believes that what, as it was in the days of Noah, means is that you will look outside and you will see a boy sparrow sitting next to a girl sparrow, and a boy ant sitting next to a girl ant, and a boy bee sitting next to a girl bee, and a boy cat sitting next to a girl cat. And when you see all these animals paired up, then that's how you know the world's about to end. That's one of the signs of the ends of the age, according to him. And that shows what kinds of things Waraqa had access to and what he didn't. Waraqa did not have access to these scriptures, period. He had access to things that are like small fragments, hymns, talking about things, that sort of thing, but they were so fragmentary that he was incapable of creating a full picture of what it's even talking about or relaying that to Muhammad. That's why you get so many weird things in Islam, because they came from Waraqa's study, which wasn't of the scriptures. If it was of the scriptures, then it would not have been insane. He would not have thought that the sign of the end of the time would be because you'd see all the animals pairing up. And yet that's what he taught.
But, so you're saying that when Ibn Ashaq claims that Waraqa attached himself to Christianity and studied scripture until he had thoroughly mastered them, that he doesn't seem to have actually mastered the text at all, and Ibn Ashaq is just wrong?
Yes, indeed. So what he did is he collected the fragments of sacred or hidden knowledge that he had access to, and he filled in the blanks with his own mind, and he told Muhammad what he had puzzled together, which is apparently exactly as much as Allah knows. So Allah knows no more than Muhammad knows from Waraqa in terms of the early text. And that's why Muhammad couldn't produce anything for a long time after Waraqa died, because he hadn't got enough stories yet. And he had to like gather stuff from people and then fool himself into thinking that Allah is giving this to him.
So Carol agrees. She says Waraqa could not have translated scriptures and taught Muhammad. Muhammad had no clue about the actual gospels. He copied what he heard in passing and got everything wrong.
And do not think that they did not have a concept of being able to copy things at that time. No, they knew. They knew how things were copied. They understood that. Him writing the scriptures according to the will of Allah is not him copying them. It's Allah willing him to have the capacity to write scripture. He's a prophet, but they pretend to ignore that bit because it's very, very inconvenient.
All right, so the rest of the comments I think I have are funny, so we'll just take them at the end and you can continue on with the presentation.
All right, so Al-Walid ibn Utbah ibn Rabia ibn Abshams, he is the paternal nephew of Sheba. That's Ibn al-Huwayrith's best friend, and the mother of his children was a Jewish woman of Yathrib, Hind bint Jarwal of the Al-Aus tribe. And even though that's a pagan Arab tribe, she was identified as a Jewish woman from the Ansar. So she's from the Ansar tribe. But that implies that she is a convert or her parents had been converts. So among the people of the Arabs in Medina, there were some converts to Judaism. There are a fair number of converts. But she got married to this guy. Now, she should have been married to him if he wasn't a Jew. Was he a Jew? I don't know. But there is a Jewish woman who is now in Mecca. Now, what's important is that she was married to Al-Walid about the same time as the Hijra, maybe somewhat before. And so this shows that some of the Ansari folks were actually opposed to Muhammad, the supposed people who would, oh, well, yes, come and rule us. Some of them were like, no, we don't think that you're a prophet. We agree with the Jews of Medina that you are not a prophet. We oppose you. And so this marriage appears to be, because of its timing, appears to be related to that unified opposition to Muhammad among some people in Medina and the people already in Mecca. So both Al-Walid and his father Utbah died in Badr against Muhammad. So this is a man married to a Jew who's like, "You're a false prophet, Muhammad." We also have the last of Khadija's cousins with monotheistic connections. This one is not Christian, but rather Jewish. So, Tuwait, and that means like a mulberry, so it's probably his nickname, Ibn Habib, Ibn Assad. So, again, another paternal grandson of Assad. He was one of the Assadis who opposed Ibn al-Huwayrith, and I told you there'd be more about him later. This is later. His mother was a Jewish slave woman listed among the and he was listed among the Qurayshis born of Jewish mothers. Majd was a slave girl of Abbas ibn al-Abbas ibn al-Muttalib, and that's the father of our famous Ibn Abbas, who's supposed to be the person who knows all about the Quran and how to explain its exposition better than anybody. His dad had a slave girl who was a Jew. Habib ibn Assad, he was eventually able to marry his father's widow named Al-Saba, and she was from the Al-Aus tribe in Medina too. She was not, as far as we know, Jewish. She was just another pagan. While she gave his father's son, it doesn't seem that she gave Habib any sons, so his son appears to be from the slave girl only. And according to this Islamic source, Muhammad welcomed Al-Hawla bint Tuwait. So this is the daughter of a man who was born of a Jewish slave girl, warmly when she visited him in Medina. So she's coming in Medina, and he's visiting, and he's welcoming her warmly. Oh, thank goodness. She came like after the treaty, quite late, probably. It seems that's whenever she arrived in Medina, and a lot of people were arriving at this time because the people in Mecca were like suffering from hunger. So some of these conversions are because they were hungry, because Muhammad was trying to starve them out. So anyway, she shows up, and he welcomed her warmly, and Aisha criticized him specifically because he isn't her mahram, so he could marry this girl, and yet, well, woman at this point, and yet he's greeting her with intimacy that Aisha is like, why are you doing that? He explained that when he had been married to Khadija, Al-Hawla used to visit them. Aisha's response suggests that Al-Hawla was young enough to excite Muhammad's interest at the time, so she was perhaps a child or a teenager in Mecca with Muhammad, and so she may have been among those late immigrants. It really seems like she's among the latest ones. But she not only used to visit them, but the idea here is that they were on intimate terms in Mecca. And of course, first of all, this shows how men and women used to be able to mingle on a social level in Mecca and were much more greatly oppressed under Muhammad's particular form of female isolation. But it also shows that coming in and out of their house regularly was the granddaughter of a Jewish woman, which is significant. So another connection, one of Khadija's not necessarily close friends, but at least close associates, who frequently came in and out, so frequently that Muhammad treated her as an intimate whenever they met again. So this is a third connection to a monotheistic origin among Khadija's cousins. There were also a number of monotheistic slaves of Khadija and Muhammad. Now, these two, Waraqa and Zayd, these both were definitely taken as children, small children, from their families. And so while they had kind of a very childlike understanding of their religion, it would have been the understanding of a very young child without any reinforcement after this point. So it would have been very muddled. Waraqa was an Abyssinian, so she had been Christian. Zayd was from the Kalb tribe. The Kalb tribe at this point was Christian. They're both from Christian backgrounds. But that's not all. There's also a guy named Abu Rafi. And he was said to have been another slave of Al Abbas, who was Muhammad's, another one of Muhammad's uncles, the father of Ibn Abbas. He was a slave of Al Abbas before being given to Muhammad. Now, you have to realize in the sources, given also often means given for consideration. It means that somebody owed somebody something, so here's a gift. It doesn't mean necessarily, usually doesn't mean actually given. There are massive difficulties with the traditions about him and his wife Salma. It's reported in Ibn Kathir and Al Bidayah Wan Nihaya, which was translated and excerpted by Darussalam publishers, and Miracles and Merits of Allah's Messenger. So this is from Ibn Kathir, published by a top Saudi publisher, religious publisher, right? So this isn't from nobody. Now, first of all, freed slave is usually a lie in these sources. The freed slaves were usually not free at all whenever they said they were. Like some of them might have not been freed to Muhammad was dead. For example, Abu Rafi was said to have been freed and married to the freed slave Salma, but their son Rafi is also somehow magically a freed slave. So this means that he was born a slave and that they were slaves when they had him. So they had to be slaves for him to be a freed slave. And our second first, here my math is reaching Muhammad's level of math. Secondly, tradition states that Salma Rafi, that she was a midwife to Khadija, as well as a midwife to Mary the Copt, and the midwife to Fatima. She was also the nursemaid of Ibrahim, not the wet nurse, but a nursemaid, and the nurse of Fatima, and that she took care of Fatima. As Fatima lay dying, she was the one taking care of her, basically. Ibn Kathir got confused and thought an otherwise unknown slave of Muhammad named Salama was a nursemaid, but the Shia say it was Salma, and because Salma and her husband were on the side of the Shia and their kids went with them, I would say that the Shia are probably correct in this instance. So she was a midwife from 598 at the latest, and that makes her born in 583 or before. So she'd be, at least 15 to be a midwife. And 632 at Fatima's death, she would have been at least 49 years old, probably older, which is totally fine. But keep in mind that midwives were already mothers. And her oldest son is Rafi, born to her and Abu Rafi, whose actual name is disputed. That's why I didn't give his name, because everybody has different names. So she had to have been owned by Khadija or Muhammad, and also married to Abu Rafi and a mother before 598. Back then, you didn't have people who trained to be midwives who weren't themselves mothers. You were someone who had given birth, and your birth had gone fairly well, and you also followed other midwives around a bit, but both of those things are necessary. You aren't just trained. If you haven't gone through birth, you aren't a midwife. In these sorts of cultures, it just did not happen. So so that means because her oldest child is Rafi, she had given birth to Rafi before Khadija gave birth to any of the children that are ascribed to Muhammad. So Rafi has to be quite a bit older. Now, Ibn Kathir believes that Abu Rafi was given or traded for consideration, more likely, to Muhammad between Badr and Uhud. Right, was Rafi a Salafi? Nice. I was like, what are you talking? Oh, just being silly. All right, sorry, having a slow moment here, taking things too seriously. And that would play down his influence overall. And then he was married to Salma. But Salma is mentioned as an Abyssinian immigrant in the Sunni Ahadith. And again, remember, she already has to have had the kids earlier. And the Shia also state that Abu Rafi explicitly was an Abyssinian immigrant too. So it makes far more sense that Muhammad or Khadija bought him to be with Salma between the time that Abu Rafi fathered her child and Muhammad declared himself to be a prophet, maybe after he declared himself to be a prophet, before immigration, but it was before that first group immigrated. Abu Rafi no longer belonged to Al-Abbas, Muhammad's uncle. Um, so Abu Rafi was therefore Muhammad's and in Muhammad's or Khadija's possession before his prophethood, most likely, and had certainly fathered a child with their slave, and so was in and out of, having relations with the slave, because they did allow slaves to marry one another. So you can have a slave of one man married to a slave of another man, and then allow them to cohabitate. So that guy is in and out of their household all the time before even their oldest kid is born, and he is said to be a Copt, which would make him what? A Christian. So no wonder they want to downplay the fact that he had been constantly in and out of their household from before Zainab bint Muhammad was born, because he's a Copt and he could have informed Muhammad of a number of things. Now, I don't think that Muhammad, that if this guy was a Copt, indeed, and I think that he was probably another one who was taken as a young child, or a second generation slave or something like that. He was definitely not a knowledgeable Christian. And the funny thing is that he is not listed. There are lists of people who are said to have been Christians and believe Muhammad, and Jews and believe Muhammad, and Persians and believe Muhammad, and he is not listed as a Christian who believed Muhammad. So they are not happy to be clear of his influence, and he probably was not like a practicing Christian. He's probably taken again as a child and had some muddled memories, which contributed to the muddling of Muhammad's theology. When you have people who were 8 or 9 or 10 who were captured and have the normal mental faculties of an average 8 or 9 or 10-year-old, and have been away from all people who are knowledgeable for a really long time, they're going to have a muddled view. So, Ibn Kathir believes that Salma was first the slave of Safiya bint Abdul Muttalib, but this is probably made up to get connection to the Zubayrids and isn't reliable. She was the mom of the Zubayrids, who were the rulers of Mecca for a long time and claimed they were like the legitimate governors of Mecca because they're so special and stuff. So probably not reliable. It's always possible that she was sold as a child and young girl to, more likely than Muhammad, Khadija, because Muhammad wouldn't have had any money. Now, the father, Abu Rafi, he had 3 known sons, Rafi, Ubaidullah, and Ali. And they're all credited as coming from Rafi, but this is another uterine impossibility. So we got more time traveling uteruses here because they're tabayun.
Yay.
So tabayun means that they're from the following generation after Muhammad. So they didn't know Muhammad. So they were born after Muhammad died. Salma was not having kids in her 50s and 60s. So they were not from Salma. They were probably just from rape slaves, and they were accredited to Salma because even though she was a slave, she was a slave of Muhammad and therefore one of his companions. And so, more status from that. But the accrediting them to being from her is like, these early Islamic scholars paid no attention to how old these women were supposed to be when they were having kids. So they just had that in there. So in summary, this is our current list of monotheists who lived in Mecca at this time, and there are more that we will discuss next week. Waraqa ibn Nawfal ibn Assad, he is called a Christian. Again, I don't think that that's accurate, but Uthman ibn al-Huwayrith ibn Assad, one of Khadija, the second of Khadija's cousins. He was almost certainly authentically a Christian, Majd, who was a slave of Al-Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, not Ibn Muttalib, sorry, Al-Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, and mother of Hawla bint Thuwait, who was close to Khadija, who was Jewish, so Jewish grandma, someone in and out of the household. Sheba, who's from Abd Shams, who is associated with the Umayyad clan, the friend of Ibn al-Huwayrith, who was a Christian. Um, Whoops, wait 1 second. There are too many people there. Let me just quickly unify this. There's an extra enter that I hit in there.
Mary's going to abrogate her own text here.
Yeah, I'm abrogating it. There we go. From current slide. There we go. Ha! Now we have the 8 again. I don't know how that jumped to 9. All right. So the wife from the Al-Aus tribe of Medina, who was Jewish from a convert family and an opponent of Muhammad, Waraqa, the Abyssinian slave of Muhammad, who was Christian in background, although a child, Zayd ibn Harith, who was a slave of Muhammad, taken from boyhood from a Christian tribe. That's the Al-Kalbi tribe. So Kalb, he's called Al-Kalbi, the Kalbi, and he's from the Kalb tribe. And then Abu Rafi, who was Muhammad's or Khadija's slave, acquired from Abbas ibn and I wrote that again, ibn al-Abdul Muttalib, who is called a Copt, and thus his background is Christian. So now we have 8 people in close association with Muhammad who, had some sort of monotheistic association, and thus the idea that there was, Muhammad could only learn things from the ether or whatever.
Jabril.
Yeah, from Jabril. Jabril brought him everything. No, what he had was muddled. What he had was confused, and what he had fit with the context of the Hijaz of the time, with the context of these Abyssinian and Coptic and Jewish and all these various slaves and these folks who were religious seekers who were all muddled and confused, and even Uthman ibn al-Huwayrith, who was only there briefly after having actually learned about Christianity. Like, he kind of liked Christianity, he liked the idea of everybody converting. He actually learned about it. When he came back, it was only briefly, and he was sent back away again and then remained in the Byzantine court ever after. So that is the end of this lesson, and next time we will learn about how Abu Bakr was himself actually a monotheist, even though that is very heavily concealed and is hidden away from folks. So
excellent. So says, Mary,
she needs to be added to the list of monotheists. Nice.
Yeah, so Mary had to start late today, so we weren't supposed to go at 7, and then we're so late that we started at 8. We're actually going to go at 8 the whole time, and she promised it would be shorter. I may or may not have believed her, but it proved to be true that it was shorter, and we are done on time. Imagine that.
I did that by cutting out all of those other topics. So there we go. Save it for next time.
Brandy says that my cats are the best of all cats. Or maybe she just meant cats in general are the best. Either way, I agree. All right. So, got several comments here that I wanted to read. Many of these are references to things that happened earlier. So if you haven't seen the whole show, you may not understand all of these, but that's just a clue for you to go back and watch. Karen says, my opera is not luxurious. I'm sad now. Very sad indeed. Nicodemus says, the way she, meaning you, Mary, speaks with such authority on these topics as if she were there. Yes, I would agree she belongs in a university lecturing. So some high praise from Nicodemus there. Thank you very much for the encouragement. Marian says that rumor has it that Allah is waiting for the infidels to invent a hearing aid that's big enough for him so he doesn't have to ride the elevator every day 24/7, referring to Allah coming down from heaven to hear the prayers, of course, which someone else independently, it wasn't in response to that, it's at a different time, but they said, and yes, here it is. Richard said that Allah descends from the seventh heaven to the first heaven every night. So now Allah have to stay in the first heaven forever because night is 24/7 on earth. Stupidity of Quran is amazing.
Oh, I
So
love
two
asking.
references.
I love asking our Muslims, does Allah observe time zones created by human beings? So does that mean that he goes down once every hour, 24 hours, to different parts? So whenever the time zone hits, he's got to come down, got to come down, got to come down. Or is he like on his own time? And so it's virtually, wherever it should be at that exact moment in terms of an astrological last third of the night, in which case he is always simultaneously descending, descended, and above,
Could
but just
be.
for different people.
Or you can just
And us,
be like Jake, who spends all his time, Jake the Muslim metaphysician, who spends all his time saying how the Trinity makes no sense. And then when he's asked about Allah descending, he says, yes, we believe it. We don't know what it means. It doesn't make any sense, but we're required to believe it. So it makes perfect sense to us.
yeah,
Obviously, he didn't say those words, but that was the gist of it.
anytime any Salafi type goes on about how the Trinity doesn't make sense, it's so funny. I mean, it's bad enough if you're Shia. It's worse if you're Sunni in general. But if you're Salafi, the fact that you're saying that is absolutely hysterically funny because you're told that basically this makes no sense. You are to accept it, akal over nakal and all of that stuff, right?
And it says there's only one night because the sun and the moon orbit Earth. That wouldn't actually
Obviously true.
make there only be one night, though, right? Because, well, that's why there'd be one night from your perspective, but somewhere else on the Earth, even in the scenario of the sun and moon both orbiting the Earth,
Oh
would still.
no. If you're talking about modern, uh, we're talking not about the modern idea where like the sun is a flashlight shining down at one part of the Earth. We're talking about the ancient idea where the sun pops up and everybody sees sunlight at the same time. So we're talking about the
Um,
true Islamic version of sun and moon, etc.
okay, good to know. So there was some questions about my cats here. So we got Artemis and we got Morgan. I think this is the first time I've certainly used the lap cat cam since I added it a couple weeks ago. But I think this might be the first time that we had two different cats and the two cams, although they've both gone up to the table now and are snuggling. So this is as Morgan here, the calico, and this is Artemis. Whenever people see Morgan on this stream, someone asks if she's a Maine Coon. She is not a Maine Coon. We did have uh, a cat that we had for like 19 years and just died a couple years ago as a Maine Coon, or at least partially Maine Coon, and she was definitely very rambunctious. Maine Coons are known for being very active, having a lot of personality, and she was no exception. That was Abby, but she is no longer with us. But since when do Muslims apply logic? Never when it comes to Islam. Always what they think is logic when it comes to critiquing Christianity. Michael K. says, Catholic apologist interviewed a researcher on Kabbalah. The guest stated that similarities between Gnosticism and Kabbalah are due to both relying on Neoplatonism, not Gnosticism directly influencing Kabbalah. Yeah, I assume where's the rest of the thought that got cut off there. Your thoughts, Mary? You're on mute.
Sorry. It is true that I am kind of using Gnosticism as a shorthand that includes Neoplatonism. But the sorts of things about, like, it's not the Christian Gnosticism. It's other flavors that are extraordinarily similar, but are also the same kinds of, like, there are stories that were probably originally Christian Gnostic that got adopted into the Talmud, for instance. The idea that God made the angels bow to Adam is from Gnosticism. It is not from a different form of Neoplatonism. It is a Gnostic belief. The heavenly Adam is a form of so they want to get rid of their old Memra theology and come up with something else. So they're importing certain ideas from the Gnostic cults into their own belief system, and then changing them around even more to make them more compatible with a view in which that removes divine Messiah, or the second person, the second power in heaven and stuff. So there really are distinctly, if you want to restrict the term Gnosticism just to these Christian cults, there are things distinctly from that absolutely ended up in Judaism. But I am using Gnosticism in a much wider sense, that there's that includes Neoplatonism within it. It also includes Hermeticism within it. So I'm using a very kind of as a broad brush term here. So yes, there are things that are directly from Neoplatonism that don't have a direct ancestor in Gnosticism. And Philo, of course, had a lot of Neoplatonism in his beliefs. But there are also distinctly Christian things. So, and yeah,
Excellent. So,
Life of Adam and Eve, as Houston Mueller said, there are several that have it, not just Life of Adam and Eve, but yeah, it's quite interesting.
so Marion says, today it's been 40 days since Ladbruk, her cat, went into the wilderness. I expect him to return soon. So Marion said on a previous stream that her cat was missing and asked for unreasonable people to pray for him. So if you're unreasonable, take up that prayer request. Apparently, he's been missing for 40 days now.
Poor kitty.
Nadisa just says, Muhammad asked Aisha, what is the difference between a goat and a woman? And then he answered himself, a goat doesn't complain. Take that as you like.
Nice.
So we have several references to Shaitan here from when we were talking about his legs earlier. I'm not what I'm not says, so never cross your legs again. And you might accidentally get yourself pregnant or your niece pregnant if you do that. Nina says, Allah's two right hands couldn't have intercourse. No, it's only legs. Doesn't work with hands or arms. It's only legs. Uzochi says, that is so sick. What? So Iblis is a trans thing?
Apparently, but he's still a he somehow. Somehow he's still a he, but he has two body parts.
Jason said, Iblis believes in self-love.
Oh,
I can't disagree.
oh dear.
I can't disagree. And then we had some comments about Allah's hands that came up immediately after. Houston says Allah can't even clap since he only has two right hands. However, as we discussed, he might also have a left hand as well, to which Villainous said, maybe he does only have two hands, which are both usually right, but he can detach one and swap it to the left side as needed. Hey, you never know. There's nothing like Allah in creation. even though you can describe him with all of these normal bodily terms, his hand isn't like our hand, as a Muslim would say. It doesn't mean he doesn't have a literal physical hand, though, because that would also be heresy to say he doesn't. Houston says, oh, I read that one. Naughty Scientist says, can Allah do the cartwheel with his two right hands? Maybe. I don't know. Like I said, there's nothing like him in creation, so we just can't say Allah knows best or some such thing. So we had a request from David Hernandez. May someone explain Aisha? Sure.
She was 9 years old.
I don't know if that's what he
9.
wanted me to do, but that's my explanation for Aisha. There was no context, so I suspect that is actually what he wanted. Nicodemus says that he's reviewing the Sister Act trilogy this Sunday with Amir Zayden. I would love to have your input if you can make it 2 p.m. Eastern. So if interested in that, check out Nicodemus's channel. He didn't address this to me, but I thought I'd give him a free ad anyway. Richard says, is it not one of Muhammad's wife's friends that told him he is a prophet, not Jibreel or Allah? And indeed, we haven't gotten to that part of Muhammad's story. I'm sure we will eventually. But he doesn't hear it from Jibreel, right? He doesn't hear it from the cave demon that squeezes him. He doesn't hear it directly from Allah. He thinks he's possessed by a jinn, runs home, and then his wife reassures him that he's not, and then she takes him to her cousins, who also assure him that he is not possessed and is in fact a prophet. Una was talking about burqas, and she said that there are many great colors of burqas. There is the trash bag, there's the camel's urine, there's the bruise, and there's the tan hide. So take your pick of which color of burqa you like. And then later on, she said that she forgot one. The newest color of burqas, semen stain. So look for those in an Islamic store near you. Houston said King Thaddeus Haraya. I like that. That is definitely a good name for me, since I am the king of China, after all. And Nina confirmed that these are good colors of burqas because Allah agrees. She got a revelation from Allah that you should wear these colors of burqa. She said, before that, she said, hear a bell. So we know definitely it was a revelation, because you only hear a bell when you're getting a revelation.
But of
Simon
course,
Pat
bells
said,
are the sound of Satan as well. So you hear
Mhm.
bells when you give revelation, but they are also the sound of Satan.
Exactly. No problems. Simon Pat said Islam would probably be more successful if it didn't mention the past. What do you think, Mary? Would Islam be better off if it didn't try to speak about the past?
Well, Islam lies about the past. So it will fool gullible people who don't take time to go, hey, wait a second, why are all these 50 and 60-year-old women giving birth? Why does none of this make sense? Why does none of it hold together for like even 5 seconds? Why does the thing that you say in the last paragraph, why is it contradicted by the next one? So, and it does, it takes time. That's a lot of times if you have a snippet here and you have another snippet there, it does take effort and experience and self-discipline to contextualize them with each other, because human beings naturally contextualize a snippet within its own context and don't notice, unless they're really thinking about or paying attention or forcing themselves to, they don't notice it doesn't fit with the very next thing that's in it.
Indeed. So we have a super chat from Jack Ray.
I can't answer this question in a 20-minute interview, nor is it wise to do so, which is why I never brought this topic up myself. You will not find one lecture of mine about this issue. It should never be brought up in public. And I don't like these idiots, and they are idiots, wallahi. This is not something you discuss amongst the masses, ya akhi. It's not wise. I encourage anybody who is really interested to go deep to take the class. I do this class. It'll be 1 year later.
Don't know about the wisdom of talking about poll taxes, but thank you for paying yours, Jack Ray. Karen says Mary's a rock star for waiting through all of this so that we don't have to, and Mary's not here to hear the praise. Shame on me for reading that while she wasn't here. Una says, to Villainous in the chat, good to see you. Great Bible study last week. So if you're not familiar, I have a Bible study typically every Friday, but every once in a while we move it to Saturday. Friday night U.S. time, so perhaps Saturday morning for people in the East, where I go through the lectionary readings for the week, and Ian and I discuss those. So if you're interested, check out the Reasoned Worship and Bible Study channel. Nina got another revelation because she heard another bell, and she said the Shahada is, I'm having trouble reading it because the cat stood up. There is no mouse, but Allahu mouse, and I bear witness that Nina is his prophetess. So
Nice.
there you go. You can take the Shahada if you like. Una says, oh, people of the chat, do not forget to strike the like button as though you fear its disobedience. And since she made this very poetic, you better obey her and strike that like button right now. Karen said, you're a rock star, Mary. I tried to read that while you're gone, but now I'm reading it again so you can't escape it.
No, I saw it. I said thank you because it was on the. It was actually streaming when I came back. So.
Gotcha. Nina says that according to Sahih Bukhari 1332, quote, it was narrated by the mother of the chat that the prophetess of Allahu Mouse prophesied the kingship of Thaddeus. Grade of this hadith is Sa Daif. So we're not quite sure how that translates into English, but that is the grade in case you wondered. Karen asks, what if Muhammad had married and fell in love with a Jew? Would history be different? Your thoughts?
I think so. I don't think that he would have been told he was a prophet. He probably would have been a goofy Merkabah mystic, but nobody would have ever heard of him.
And Morkay says that Yasser Qadi really doesn't like those idiots. He doesn't, does he? Doesn't like idiots like Jack Ray who gives super chat donations. Deborah says, thank you so much for your live stream. All glory to God. Absolutely. To God, the glory. Anything that was beneficial in this, he gets the credit for. Anything that annoyed you, well, you can give me or Mary the credit for that one, I suppose.
Yep.
Catholic 3 DOD was trying out all the animations and used the happy birthday to no one. But last week was my wife's birthday. We were going to have a live stream for that. She was not feeling well, but hopefully we'll have that this week, perhaps on Thursday. So look for that coming up. She also used the Apple hashtag animation, also without a comment. Nina says that all those points that I have, presumably, must be given to her as a loan so that Allah, the Mousiest, will be pleased with me. Give Allahu Mouse alone, give Allahu Mouse alone. But she did admit that she can't tell the difference between Shaitan and Allahu Mouse.
Well, she has something else similar to Muhammad. He definitely could not tell the difference between Jibreel and Shaitan.
Mm-hmm. And she said that in response to being pointed out that when you hear a bell, it might be the instrument of Satan, as we just said. Had a couple more comments on Allah's hands here. Houston says Allah can't have a third hand because he created Adam with his two hands.
Oh, well, I mean, he may have only used two of them. Maybe he was holding the other one reserved. Maybe he didn't want to touch Adam with his left hand because it's his dirty hand, and he was using it for... I'm not sure what he'd use it for, because we all know that Allah does not poop, and Allah's lack of an anus is how you can tell the difference between him and Muhammad. But he must be using it for something untoward, or else it would not be his dirty hand, and there would be no need to be very clear that he has at least two right hands.
Excellent. And then Jason said, in this case, two rights do make a wrong. And I can't disagree with that. Una said, don't forget to thank the mother of the chat. Indeed. You should all thank Mary. Jack Ray, I don't know what he's comparing it to, or because he said almost like, but there's no other object to compare it to, so I don't know the context, but he said a shorter catechism in reference to the cat cam, presumably. Christina said, I really like the cat cam you have. Indeed, I think I get more compliments on the cats than on anything I say, which is fair. After all, they are adorable. And in regards to wrongs and rights, Jack Ray said Muhammad had so many wrongs and absolutely no rights for anyone but himself. Indeed. Finally, second to last, we have a request from Hutchie. A timeline or family tree visual of all these relatives would be super useful, especially if it included their religion. So Mary did make a bit of a family tree at the start of the last episode, but wants a bigger one.
Well, this one would not be terribly
the more people
helpful.
you include.
Yeah, it's not really more, it would just be kind of, it would muddle stuff up, because these are all just descendants of Khadija's dad's brothers. That's who they all are. The Assadis means that they're male line descendants of Assad. So, yeah, they're all very closely related. Of the three of Khadija's cousins that I talked about, it's all on the Assad side, which means they're descendants of her father's brothers. But the other folks, like the two folks from Abd Shams, they're related to each other, and of course distantly related through the Qurayshi to everybody else. And then the other three are slaves. So you have three cousins, an uncle and a nephew in a different line, and then the three slaves. It's kind of funny. It's like, so which slaves aren't monotheistic of Khadija and Muhammad, of their slaves in Mecca? Maysara's religion isn't stated, and Salma's religion isn't stated. But those are the only additional slaves we have. We have 5 slaves who were almost certainly their slaves in Mecca that we know of, and 3 of them are explicitly from Christian backgrounds. Or, like, that's pretty amazing.
So I lied about that being second to last because a couple more comments on Allah's hands came in. Hutchie says, I imagine one of Allah's hands is like Action Man's a grippy hand. Not quite sure what that means, but good to know. Naughty Scientist says, I want to play tug of war with Allah, but only left hands are allowed. And Morkay says, with 2 right hands, Allah can't drive a stick shift. And Jack Ray asks if 2 rights is haram, which I'll let Sneeko answer.
Haram! Don't do that, it's a sin!
All right, so the comment I wanted to end on here from Allah is shed, pray for Mohammedans. And I do want to remind people that we're not here just to make fun of Islam. We're not here just to entertain ourselves or get a good education. I'm happy with all of those things happening, but what we're really here for is for the souls of Muslims. More than 1 billion people who are lost and in need of a savior. So I definitely encourage people to remember Muslims in their prayers. If you know Muslims in your personal life, co-workers, neighbors, friends, whatever the case may be sure to have conversations with them, friendly conversations. Don't go and hit them over the head with some polemical lines, but start a conversation and hopefully over time lead them to the truth. Thank you all for tuning in today. We'll be back next week to continue the series. Mary sent me a proposed title. Next week might be titled Abu Bakr, Jew or Christian. So there is your preview, unless Mary wants to say something else about that.
Yep, him and the poet that Muhammad is accused of one of the poets Muhammad is accused of plagiarizing. So those are going to be among, and then the other two dudes that we didn't talk about of the four Hanifs of early Mecca are going to be the main ones, and then there is one other dude, or a few other dudes who supply Muhammad later on with information that I'm going to cover.
All right. So thank you everyone who tuned in today. I know that you all chose to watch me instead of David Wood. So appreciate that. Looks like we're actually going to have a shorter stream than him, believe it or not,
Amazing.
because we're about to log off and he's still going and he only started like 5 minutes later than us. So if you're interested in that, I'll put the link to his live stream in the chat. In addition to Mary next week, I'll be hopefully, her health allowing, live with my wife later in the week, either Wednesday or Thursday. I'll have my Bible study on Friday and working on getting a couple things scheduled for over the weekend. Until we meet again, God bless everyone. Go and serve the Lord.